Hey guys, how are we doing? Back on another video from Totally Not Mark. Now, the Attack on Titan anime is one of my favourite animes. Very special to me. Ended this year. Really, really enjoyed it. But I am anime only. And I thought it'd be really cool to see a review in the perspective of someone that has read the manga. And that is Totally Not Mark's review, the Colossal review. I noticed that the final chapter is its own thing, so we will do that separately. I just thought it'd be cool to check out this. Boom, let's check this chunky video. Checked out, see what Mark thought, see what he has to say. And yeah, like I said, I'm anime only. I'm really intrigued to see a manga perspective on this. Say the line, Bart.
Attack on Titan is my favorite story of all time.
There we go.
Being someone that's made a career out of reviewing great stories from the East, today I wanted to celebrate the conclusion of what is, in my opinion, one of the single most consistent, thrilling, and engaging stories I've ever read, with a special review unlike anything I've ever made. Instead of giving each individual arc or season its own video like I've produced in the past, for Attack on Titan, I wanted instead to create one colossal review covering everything, spanning every character, every gruesome bloody battle, and every single arc.
Because sometimes as well he'll do them and then put them into one chunky video after the fact as well. I like that he's just like straight away gone and made like this video.
All in an effort to see what made this story so fantastic and to try to deconstruct some of the ideas author Hajime Isayama
I still need to watch the high school.
built this world with, from its emphatic beginnings to its masterful conclusion. But don't worry, while I fully intend on covering material not yet covered by the anime, I won't spoil anything concerning that portion of the story until I first cover the first 3.5 seasons. And once I do, I'll be giving any anime onlys a fair warning before I jump into any current manga exclusive material. But as you can see by looking down at the timeline,
I love this.
that
This is
won't be
brilliant.
for quite some time. I've been waiting to make this video for 8 years, so cancel all of your appointments, grab your maneuvering gear, and give up your hearts because
Oh, yeah, 'cause it's been
today
10 years
I am
now, and this
reviewing
came out 2 years ago,
everything
didn't it?
in what
Yeah.
I consider to be among some of the most impressive stories ever to come out of Japan. I'm Totally Not Mark, and this is my colossal review of Hajime Isayama's modern manga masterpiece. This is the cruel, the inspirational, and the relentlessly powerful Shingeki no Kyojin Attack on Titan.
Right, let's go.
It's commonplace within various online anime communities to hear the phrase, "This show is awesome, but only after X number of episodes."
Ooh.
Attack on Titan requires no such forewarning.
No.
The fall of Shinganshina.
It just goes straight in, doesn't it? Straight in. It just doesn't stop.
Boasting what is, in my opinion, one of the strongest and most compelling opening sequences a series of this nature could possibly have, while also confined to a runtime of roughly 23 minutes. Attack on Titan runs through my must-have narrative checklist with the same speed and efficiency as someone looking to set the next American Ninja Warrior speed record. Key character introductions, check. An exciting, inciting incident followed by clearly established motivations for the main cast, check.
Oh, yeah.
A long-term hook, check. Compelling and easy to understand premise,
Oh, mate, yeah, the whole key for the...
double check. But truthfully, these are all elements that are either rudimentary, fundamental, or won't be paid off until much, much later on in the story. So
great writing
what
for
did
me.
Attack on Titan do with its first episode to show people that it's worth sticking around for? Well, by finding a way to demonstrate its best attribute, its ability to deliver a twist and find deeper meaning in the most unlikely of places. For me, Attack on Titan's strongest elements were always how it adhered to the internal logic of its established world, pulling off twist after twist, ascribing meaning to the most mundane or trivial of circumstances. If you were to look at stories like One Punch Man, One Piece, or My Hero Academia, these are all tales that through one way or another manage to communicate effectively in their own openings what their respective stories are about and of what a potential reader or viewer stands to get out of their material.
Yeah, you kind of get a really basic understanding of what you're getting with the story. With Attack on Titan is...
However, Attack on Titan demonstrating a successful long-term subversion of expectations isn't exactly something one can demonstrate within the confines of a single episode or chapter, so how did Isayama overcome this? He starts his episode with a flash forward to a big cataclysmic event, and this is an extremely common technique in storytelling. Start with something impressive to help garner attention right off the bat. However, what makes this an exceptionally great choice of impactful moment is that this moment, this inciting incident, while being paramount to kicking off the events that follow, also gets paid off within this same very episode, establishing for new viewers a sense that they are in safe hands and that if they go along with Isayama on this gruesome, tragic, and twisted adventure, he will prove to us all that from the very beginning, he's known exactly how he wanted to end this story. One of the major criticisms lobbed against Attack on Titan throughout most of its run has been how irritable, naive, and annoying the character of Eren Yeager can be at times. While he does have moments where he wields all the natural charisma of a typical shonen protagonist, those moments, particularly in Season 1, are fleeting at best.
I will kill all the Titans. I hate them. Hate those Titans.
And I believe this to be by design, making Eren Yeager, in my opinion, not only a terrifically written character, but a phenomenally composed main protagonist that is tailor-made for this story specifically. Looking at this opening scene and its aftermath as a whole, it's clear to see a number of elements are after being taken care of quite neatly. But moreover, what really caught my eye was how it communicated Eren Yeager's character in a rather unconventional but incredibly engaging way. Typically speaking, in traditional shonen storytelling, the main character normally carries with them some attribute that makes them special or gives them agency over the story being told. Think Luffy's Devil Fruit power or Goku's Saiyan genetics. In other words, broadly speaking, all characters can fall under two broad character types or categories, with those categories being reactionary characters and active characters. Neither one of these categories is better than the other by default, they just offer different
it's just a different way of telling a story through that character, isn't it? Like, yeah, there's no like perfect way of it's not like one story is better than the other. It depends what type of story you're trying to tell.
Pros and cons to their respective stories, which means choosing which category your protagonist falls into is incredibly important to your series' success. The perfect examples of exemplary reactionary characters in the protagonistic roles can be observed through characters like Saitama from One Punch Man or Gohan from Dragon Ball Z. Both of these characters are incredibly engaging in their own unique ways, but what they share in common is that their wow or interest factors come not necessarily from how they engage with the world or make decisions, but instead how they react to and subsequently deal with the stresses the world they dwell within presents them.
Definitely. Like the whole thing with Cell, that was like him reacting to the whole situation.
Gohan is put into situations he otherwise doesn't want to see, and those stresses cause him to become the character people remembered him for.
And because we know him like that, we're like, oh, what's it gonna do next? And we understand that character. We know that he's like that. It makes it really engaging.
In the context of Attack on Titan, Mikasa Ackerman is a terrific reactionary character. However, when she tries to enforce her own agency over the narrative, in other words, tries to be an active protagonist, it normally doesn't end well for her.
Yeah. God damn.
On the other hand, an active character doesn't wait for the plot to arrive at their doorstep. Normally, they dictate or make decisions that bring them closer to conflict themselves. In other words, these characters drive the plot. Think characters like Luffy or Vegeta. Both are very different and offer different functions within their respective stories, but both during their runs enact their own agency and will that oftentimes creates story progression or conflict within the plot. And this would be about the time where I would draw attention to active characters within Attack on Titan's world, but I'm not going to do that. And that's primarily because Attack on Titan doesn't have any active characters really to speak of.
What?
And the reason why I bring this up at all is because Hajime Isayama, with the main protagonist of Eren Yeager, elected to write him as an active character in a world that forces him to be reactionary. His character structure literally mimics humanity's struggle against the Titans. Throughout the first 2 episodes, Eren's contempt for the lazy, the complacent, and for the Titans is there for all to see clearly.
Yes.
With this contempt burns an intense desire to bring forth change to the world he feels trapped within. However, he has no power. And these are the circumstances Isayama decides to introduce the inciting incident that will inform the rest of Eren's life with. Suddenly, an abnormally tall Titan, for the first time in the collective memory of mankind, peers over those incubating and now protective walls before smashing an enormous hole through the outer perimeter of Shiganshina, and as a result, any sense of control or security in Eren Yeager's life comes quite literally crashing down around him.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of the most raw and brutal scenes in all of Attack on Titan for me. And while I'm sure not many would agree, as there are far more brutal or harrowing circumstances later on, this scene was the catalyst that awakens an
Some of the stuff they do is so goddamn over the top brutal, man.
balance and anger within Eren that informs every single action he takes thereafter. This is the first of many sobering realizations Eren is confronted by in the series, and for me, one of the most powerful. Once again exhibiting his active protagonistic characteristics, Eren immediately does everything in his power to free his mother from beneath the debris, ignoring all the chaos around him, even going as far to instruct the demonstrably stronger Mikasa to aid in this effort. With all hope seemingly lost, Isayama sees fit in this moment to inject a hint of hope to the character of Hannes. Representing thus far in the story security and safety within the walls, Hannes announces that there's nothing to fear and that he will save Eren, his mother,
Yeah, but then,
Carla, and Mikasa without delay. This is the moment Attack on Titan sets itself apart from most other anime. And so, with the small injection of hope and optimism, the story is now primed to free fall into the anguish and hopelessness Isayama has set as its target from the very beginning. Coming to realize that he's facing certain death, Hannes takes Carla's dying wish in saving both Eren and Mikasa against their will as they flee from the approaching Titan. Eren, now with zero agency over even his own actions, is forced to bear witness to the horrifying scenes that, to this day, are still etched vividly onto his mind. As Eren is forced to look on, he witnesses his mother struggle, get killed, and ultimately devoured by the most dangerous entity in this fictional world. In this scene, Eren is confronted by the reality that he is not strong enough. Whether it's through persuasion or physical action, no matter how hard he seems to struggle, he is a puppet that is forced to dance to the whims of the horrid circumstances that befall him, fostering a deep and powerful hatred for these enemies of humanity within Eren to now set his sights on overcoming. And in a powerful moment that's encapsulated within the second episode, Eren loudly declares and vows that he will slaughter every single last one of them.
every one of them.
In this first episode, we've learned a litany of different facts about this world. We've been introduced to and have gotten to know all of the main characters to varying degrees. We've been given a strong motivation, a grim set of circumstances, some terrifying antagonists, and a carrot that has been dangled in front of our collective faces before being gently lifted away. Or
You get a lot. You get a lot.
has it? As an audience, we are met with one horrific incident after the next. Our main characters orphaned, hundreds of thousands dead, and a massive chunk of land relinquished to the might of the Titans. Now that we are familiar with what needs to be done, and the Herculean effort it will require to successfully reclaim what was once lost, Isayama introduces us to the next section of this epic tale.
俺は来年訓練兵に志願する。巨人と戦う力をつける。
Oh, you will. You will.
The 104th Training Corps. The 104th Training Corps arc of Attack on Titan is, for me, the most telling and perhaps one of the shortest arcs in the series. In this, Hajime Isayama establishes and emphatically demonstrates without any uncertainty what the focus of Attack on Titan is going to be. It's easily recognized that the manga or anime industry enjoys school or training to act as a mainstay backdrop or primary setting for many of its most successful stories. Right off the top of my head, I can think of several that fit that billing. In effect, there's an entire industry built around that very concept due to how successful it is, and it is so for good reason. It's relatable, and as such offers ample opportunity for meaningful characterization in both the main and extended cast, making it extremely valuable for a writer to help bond their reader base with their world of colorful characters. However, as I touched on earlier, because the world of Attack on Titan isn't meant to be comfortable or relatable in this way, as a result it seems as though Isayama made this training arc as short as he possibly could, lasting only 2 episodes in the anime and 2 chapters in the manga.
Wow, it was only 2 chapters. Mate, but then only 2 episodes in the anime as well. Like, how many chapters goes into an episode? Wow, okay.
We follow the progression of Eren, Mikasa, Armin, as
How big were the chapters? Still, that's pretty short.
well as a litany of new cadets brought into the supporting cast as they train and prepare for the day that they join the military and defend humanity from the Titans. There are pros and cons to this decision, and depending on what you think is more important within a story, ironically will dictate what side of this wall you stand. One of the major criticisms leveled against Attack on Titan, particularly
wall?
during Season 1, was its lack of meaningful character interactions and development. And I think it's easy to see why. With its regimented focus on plot progression, narrative sleight of hand, and thematic messaging, Attack on Titan, perhaps more so than any other popular Japanese story, doesn't bask in or enjoy the benefits provided by the relatable settings that seldom present themselves within the story. And this narrative decision, on top of having obvious upsides for pacing and cliffhanger placement, also yields its downsides, which really only present themselves in any obvious way when an emotional response is called upon later in the story. Not having spent any meaningful time with a significant number of these characters really at this point, flashbacks to their training days often depict interactions we never saw during this point in the story. One clear example of this comes from Season 2, wherein John reflects upon Berthol's apparently strange sleeping pose nostalgically. This creates a massive dissonance for viewers who want to relate to what John is saying in that moment, but can't because for them, this apparent regular occurrence was never shared with us during this brief window into their time spent during the 104th training
we
regiment.
never got to see it
However, in
ourselves,
saying
yeah.
that, this doesn't mean that meaningful character development isn't present within this section of the story at all. In fact, some of my favorite developments for characters came from this very section, and it all kicks off on day 1 of the 104th Training Corps. Despite not having even cleared, let alone perfected, any of the first obstacles in his training journey, when questioned by inquisitive cadets like Connie or Thomas about the Colossal Titan and Armored Titan that destroyed his home, perhaps to Eren's surprise, he has to hold back his shock and tears before once again brandishing the persona of someone he wants to be. However, this time, someone sees through his act.
John,
お
yeah.
いおい正気か今お前調査兵団に入るって言ったのか
The first person that takes Eren to task is a confident John Kirstein, and he's probably my favorite character from this section of the story, and perhaps even the entire season. His personality is believable, pragmatic, and above all else, realistic, making him the perfect foil for Eren's headstrong and possibly dangerously blind optimism. However, interestingly, the initial conflict and subsequent conversation John and Eren share comes across as appreciably different in the manga than it did in its anime adaptation.
Okay.
In the anime, Eren seems to dominate the conversation and sounds the most convincing. However, the manga boasts a much more nuanced perspective, with John having a lot more to take Eren to task with, citing
Oh, right, okay. Right, okay, cool.
his dangerous mindset possibly leading to the deaths of his friends and impressionable acquaintances.
I like that we're going to get this. I thought it was just going to be a manga perspective, but we're getting manga anime comparisons as well. That's boss.
Unlike Eren, Jean doesn't have any desire to enlist in the Survey Corps, much less fight Titans. He views the walls as very much a temporary, fleeting luxury to enjoy before their inevitable collapse. In other words, he's defeatist. He accepts his circumstances and makes the best of it. The exact opposite of Eren.
Yeah.
And so, joining the military police is of paramount importance to Jean. And this is just the first of a number of significant differences the anime has made to the source material. It's difficult conversations like this one with Jean that honestly made this section of the story so enjoyable for me. Having seen what Ground Zero was like, it's interesting getting to see what other perspectives have to offer and how what they heard differs greatly to what actually happened thanks to sensationalism. It's a minor aspect to the story that goes a long way in helping create an atmosphere of a more fleshed out and believable world, and how they affect our protagonist when reality hits them in the face. This shake in his confidence, this sudden dip in his belief in himself, while fleeting and short-lived, grants us a sobering and necessary
Oh, foreshadowing.
look into the mind of who Eren truly is at this time in his life. He's now confronted with the question, what if he can't do this? Had this been Goku or Luffy in this same scenario, they wouldn't have let this setback phase them in the slightest.
No, they just keep going and keep going. Yeah.
They would have just viewed it optimistically as something they need to overcome eventually, because that's what their natural mindset is. But for Eren, this confidence he projects is an act, not just to everyone around him, but also, as we saw when confronted about the fall of Shiganshina, is also something he's lying to himself about. In other words, there's a sprinkling of doubt there. The one thing that sets Eren apart from everyone else is his desire to achieve and be the change he wants to see in the world. And now, after having graduated, Eren stands atop the walls of the Tross district. In his eyes, he and his fellow cadets have all transformed from children into competent soldiers ready to enact change unto the world.
And then boom! Oh my god! Yes. Oh.
Battle for Tross District. The Battle for Tross District is Attack on Titan's most important arc thematically, and what impressed me the most about it isn't so much its continued shouldering of the established narrative from the prior episodes and chapters, but more so how it forces all of us to collectively wake up to what the real story being told here actually is. In this arc, along with the rest of the main cast, we experience all the same shock, terror, and awe that these characters we've come to know do. For me, the Battle of Tross isn't so much the continuation of this story, but instead the hijacking of a brand new one.
Yeah.
In the first few episodes, Hajime Isayama focused on establishing his tight-knit cast of characters, and with the same loving touch only George R.R. Martin could enjoy,
He just kills them off, man.
Isayama forced us to watch all of those bright-eyed and optimistic characters face the grim reality of the cruel world he's created.
I remember. Whoa!
much like-
I remember the when it first started coming out and telling people it's like, don't get comfortable with a certain character, don't get favorites, because you never know how long they're gonna last.
Life, it's not entirely devoid of hope entirely. Soldiers like Sasha, after having been established in the prior chapters, provide the comedic relief amidst a sea of tension and anger. For me, she represents joy in this series. Instead of droning on about the plight of the world, she often in scenes focuses on what excites her or what she's looking forward to most. She believes in a future that's realistic.
Oh, don't do that.
This scene, right at the top of the Tross arc, is my favorite Sasha scene from Season 1. Many, including myself, upon seeing this scene for the very first time, notice it as Eren's defining coming-of-age standoff against the enemy of mankind and the one responsible for bringing his world to ruin. And this is quite standard for anime, and as people, we always try to search for commonalities as well as patterns of behavior that might help us make sense of new situations. It's for this very reason popular media is scared to do anything too experimental. Why risk doing something creative if you have something that works right now? And so, when I watched this scene on my very first time going around, Eren both impressed me and filled me with excitement as he readied himself to face off against this world's most dangerous opponent, the Colossal Titan.
Mate.
However, now looking back at it, I love it for an entirely different reason, because it highlights that there's no one right way to approach something, and that just because he's the main character, it doesn't mean that the decisions that he ultimately makes will lead him in the right direction. For after the Colossal Titan arrives on the scene, instead of being in the mindset to look after his friends or to save Samuel from falling to his death, Eren, instead, much like everyone else, is in shock, leaving Sasha as the only one to save her fellow cadet from his meeting with the pavement. And what's Eren's first move when he snaps out of it? Accompanied by a fittingly cinematic and emphatic musical track, Eren attempts to rally his comrades and charge the Colossal Titan alone. And it's that attention to detail and conflict that I adore about Attack on Titan. It feels as though when I'm reading or watching this story that there's a tremendous amount of effort after going into communicating every aspect of the story to me. For instance, unlike the other new recruits that brandish their military shirts, Eren maintains wearing the shirt synonymous with his hometown of Shiganshina.
Ah. Why have I never clocked onto that? Wow, okay.
Reflecting the very reality of this scene itself, and as a subtle visual indicator of Isayama's morally complicated approach moving forward with the rest of this mini-arc in Trust. Reminding me of one of my favorite writers from Hollywood, Pete Docter. He's one of the writers behind films like Toy Story, Inside Out, and Up. And in 2015, Pete sat down to discuss his process and approach to creative writing. And in doing so, said something that I thought captured the spirit of Isayama's approach to writing Attack on Titan perfectly.
Monsters started at about the same time the kid did. As I was working on the film, I was like, this is great. And then my wife would say, he smiled for the first time, and you missed it. I want to be in both places, but I can't. And that really is what became the story, the sort of emotional backbone of Monsters. You know, it's that impossible struggle with no answer that I think makes for good stories. The more particular and specific you are in the storytelling, the more generally it applies.
Right.
If you try to generalize, then nobody really gets anything. But if you're very specific and personal about it, it seems to resonate more.
There are no straightforward answers. Things do not go according to plan, and even if you work hard to achieve your dreams, it doesn't make you entitled to achieving those dreams.
No, that's very true as well. People always go, yeah, but I worked hard for it. It's like, yeah, but things get in the way sometimes.
Having spent the last 4 episodes establishing a tragic backstory for its main character, a compelling antagonist
Doesn't mean you should stop though.
force to fight against, and has shown a team of young, likable characters work hard training for a better tomorrow. In the battle for Trost, we learn that Attack on Titan isn't concerned with adhering to tradition or cliche.
Nay, this moment.
I am now looking at this scene for what feels like the 10th time in a row now, and I can't help but recall the sheer shock and awe I felt during my very first viewing of it. However, looking at it now, while my familiarity with the material has disarmed its shock value, it instead, for me
I'm not gonna die in a place like that.
at the very least, hammers home something much more
Oh, but you are.
important for us as viewers and readers to take away. Having spent years training, going through hell and back, after having convinced all of his closest friends in the military to give up their lives of safety in the name of freedom, Eren Yeager watches his entire unit get taken out one by one and eaten before his very eyes. And even though Eren manages to save Armin in one of the most stunning and tenacious sequences in the first season, he too crumbles to the weight of the task being asked of him. Is he a hero? Well, there's a little more to it. Those of you that have seen this, whether you're a fan or not of this moment, are no doubt thinking at this time, yeah, this moment was sorta cool, but it gets completely undervalued by the fact that he comes back a couple episodes later thanks to a newly discovered mysterious ability. I can absolutely see this point of view, and if I'm being completely honest, these talking points were certainly shared between myself and friends of the series back in 2013 when we were discussing it. However, 2021 Mark has to strongly disagree because whether or not Eren came back, Eren tried his best and he lost. And not just that, but he specifically ignored the warnings everyone around him offered in favor of believing that he had some insight that no one else had. When in reality, in the end, he wasn't even remotely enough to change a single thing beyond saving his one friend. And no amount of getting a second chance can take away from that fact of the moment. Those characters are gone, and they're gone forever. He tried his best and wasn't even remotely enough. Because of him, a large number of his friends died, and even more have joined the Survey Corps, putting their own lives at great risk for the cause he was so confident he could reach. In this moment, Eren is shown to be the dangerous, delusional child Jean so accurately labeled him earlier in the story, a fair distance from the triumphant hero he was depicted as seconds prior. Somewhat interestingly, now that Eren, the main driving force behind the narrative, takes a back seat, the supporting cast gets to explore their role and in many ways get to lead the charge in scenes that eventually today amount to some of my absolute favorites within this very story, particularly with the characters of Mikasa, Jean, and Armin. These 3 characters, more than any other, are explored in great detail within this section. Again, initially upon first viewing, I was excited and interested by the prospect of Eren acting as a distraction to the true main character I suspected in Mikasa. And when it was revealed that Eren was to in fact return, I couldn't help but feel concerned with how the story would handle the addition of further exploration into the supporting cast now that they had to share time with Eren, and on top of that distinguish themselves while participating in a set of almost identical problems or circumstances. And so the question became, how do you make these people stand out? Well, with 3 characters, Isayama decided to individualize or identify the 3 characters by creating very different emotional problems for them to overcome, rooted respectively in their past, present, and future concerns. In what I originally believed to be Mikasa's main character moment revealing her backstory instead became a portal into the day she met Eren for the very first time, illuminating for us these past scars that inform the person she is today, bringing to the forefront of the narrative this struggle she engages with to find meaning in her life, not replacing Eren but reaching out to find resolve and purpose in a world without him, the only family she had left and held onto fondly. It's a telling set of circumstances and one that speaks largely into the psyche of Mikasa's character. Jean, on the other hand, isn't haunted by any scars from something that happened to him long ago, but instead is faced with figuring out who he is in the here and now. Having been initially headstrong in his decision to join the military police, Jean is forced to contend with the dangers of the front lines, is tasked with leading his comrades to safety, and made to provide answers in impossible situations to an ever-dwindling group of trainee cadets.
Yeah, he's really got to step up to a situation he just never ever wanted to be in.
Beneath him. Jean's development is honestly this arc's shining achievement in terms of arc progression, I believe. Taking a once apathetic soldier and through trial by fire transforming him into a sympathetic leader that sees the true value he can provide to the people in his command that otherwise would have almost certainly lost their lives that day without his ability to make quick and pragmatic decisions. In this battle for Trost, Jean learns that he's not destined for a cushy life in the interior, but instead is needed in the Survey Corps. And it's this struggle or standing in the face of terrifying reality and ultimately a decision that makes Jean one of the most relatable and well-handled characters in the first season of this story for me. With the scene he forces himself to stay when called upon by Erwin acting as one of my favorites, not just in this section, not just in this arc, but the entire story as a whole. And finally, we have Armin, who much like Jean shines like few others, all the while playing up to the strengths of his character. Ever since being introduced at the very beginning alongside characters like Eren and Mikasa, Armin has very much struggled with his sense of self-worth. And during this intense battle, Armin grapples with his perception of himself and who he ultimately wants to be in the future. Up until this point in the story, we've dealt with primarily our established cast and their conflict against the Titan threat. Thus far in the series, Titans have provided a fantastic antagonistic foil to battle against, allowing Isayama to establish and introduce the main characters and elements within the story. However, now, after having familiarized ourselves with all the necessary trainee characters, and after demonstrating that the enemy is far greater than we could have possibly prepared for, we finally get a glimpse at the nuance, politics, and fear that lurk within the minds of the broader military within this world.
Yeah, this is where we start to get more of, so it's not just the Titans anymore. This is where we start to realize, yeah, like you're saying, there's politics within the world. There's threats within the walls as well as outside.
All the while placing a tremendous amount of pressure on Armin's intellect, and on top of this being a phenomenally directed episode in the anime that is just as exciting as any action sequence with it just being a conversation, it also acts as another terrific example of world building within Attack on Titan, which I think is one of its biggest strengths. Whether it be learning how the military operates, getting to know the higher-ups, or seeing people chit-chat on the streets, the Battle for Trost more than anything else introduces us to the real story being told here. This is a series that once it establishes a rule, it adheres to them under real-world logic. It doesn't matter who you are or who you think you are, you still need to convince the minds around you if you want their help or understanding. Upon rewatching this section of the story, I was struck not just by the amazing dialogue from the main characters, but also from the background characters. Episode 6 has a really touching scene wherein we get a peek into the perspective of a mother and daughter saved by Mikasa. Mutterings like the mother's words comforting her daughter like, "Papa will shoot all the Titans with his cannons," is small, but it does an immense amount of legwork when it comes to building up the world Attack on Titan is set, reinforcing that there are children and families behind every single life lost due to the invading Titan threat. And while the battle for Trost yielded many casualties, humiliations, and took from Eren his expectation to say the least, it also offers another element. A chess piece that no one has ever had on their side of the board has suddenly made itself visible to them.
Let's go. This was so sick. The brutality of him just like stamping on him, the way he fights them, it's just like, ah.
Eren can now wield the power of a Titan. However, as I've just shown, it's easy to empathize with the fear every soldier here is demonstrating.
Oh yeah, God, there's so much confusion. There's the one thing they've been fighting like their whole lives to try and live, like survive against, and then now it's like, what?
They all have families or something worth living for. Why risk something so valuable? One of the many themes explored during this portion of the series at large is that of fear and how people choose to deal with it, for better or worse. And an aspect to this story I relish and adore is how it tries in earnest to adhere to real-world logic and atmosphere where it can. And few other scenes prior to this one capture that reality for me in the same phenomenal, goosebump-inducing way that this scene did. All the while, we struggle to make sense of this situation in real time with the characters on screen, hoping and praying for Armin to pull off a miracle in the face of certain death. Looking at Attack on Titan, I'm sure many fans might label Mikasa as the foil to Eren within their group. She brushes him the wrong way very often, and she's clearly capable of feats that he wishes he was capable of. However, interestingly, upon doing my research for this video, I noticed that along with Eren being a great example of an unsuccessful active protagonist struggling in this world, Armin is, on the other hand, a very natural and, although reluctant, successful reactionary character. And as this series progresses, I think it makes perfect sense how these two end up even looking at them right now in this season 1. Unlike typical shonen protagonists that brandish some supernatural power, Armin arms himself with strategy and quick thinking. In episode 10, similar to how Gohan would be forced into situations he would otherwise try to avoid, Armin is forced to use his superpower and reacts to the dire circumstances appropriately. Whether that takes place as he and his friends are cornered in a courtyard, or in the case of this scene, help to orchestrate the successful recapture capture of trust. Armin is quite literally the opposite of Eren. Eren, the eager agent struggling to enact change in a world that refuses to yield, and Armin, the reluctant hero that naturally finds his footing when faced with the adversity the world presents his way. And for me, it was that element to Armin's character that made him the most relatable person in the series. He's very clearly flawed and struggling with fear, something that most people can relate to, I would imagine. Many people might not closely identify with the relentless psychotic tenacity of Eren and the athletic perfection that is Mikasa. And watching over the course of this series as Armin transforms from the skittish nerd to the heroic strategist is for me one of the most satisfying experiences, and really the primary reason as to why he is my favorite character within this story. The female Titan.
Oh my god.
In Season 1, the first few episodes set up the main characters and the battle for Tross sets up the broader world within the walls we're exploring, and then the second half of Season 1 begins and the training wheels come flying off.
Mate, as soon as you see that female Titan running, it's like, what is happening? And it's just so quick again. It just happens so fast. People start getting thrown around, kicked.
Eve of the counterattack, the 57th exterior scouting mission, the female Titan, and assault on Stohes. These are the arcs that make up the second half of Season 1, and while the aforementioned sections that make up the beginning of the series build upon each other and could work as standalone stories, these new upcoming arcs depend on each other and work together to achieve a specific aura for the readers and viewers. One that I believe is the defining trait of Attack on Titan's narrative, the mystery that informs the action right beneath the surface. As I mentioned towards
What a way to end Season 1 as well, man, with that. It's just like, then we waited how many years?
the beginning of this video, a challenge that Isayama was confronted with early on was how to best communicate the strengths of Attack on Titan's narrative all within the confines of a single opening episode. In other words, how to create a short-term payoff. And in the end, I thought he did exceptionally well in solving that problem, but little did we know the level of proficiency and masterful subversive skills that were right around the corner.
Yeah.
Unburdened by the constraints of the first episode's runtime and the shackles of
Yeah, so it's like someone in the group is a traitor, and they're just flying around, just like cutting the.
a typical shonen plot, Isayama
Attack on Titan is so good.
in this section dove nape first into the military-themed kaiju thrashing political mystery thriller he so carefully has set up. However, looking back on my first ever viewing of this season in 2013, I have to admit that while exhilarating to see unfold, so many details fell by the wayside for me. And in one way, Isayama was counting on that. Unbeknownst to me and perhaps many of you, dozens of clues had already been advertised in order to prime us for the reveals and surprises that will
Yeah.
eventually come to our attention down the road. However, on first viewing, I found it to be somewhat overwhelming at times. In this season, dozens and dozens of new characters are introduced, relationships are established, and political and military hierarchies are presented to us, as well as a bizarre set of natural and unnatural enemies that make the world of Attack on Titan so interesting. And that's not even to make mention of the anime eye catches that you literally have to pause in order to read. No one can read all of that in 3 seconds. I
Yeah.
refuse to believe that. I'm not bad at reading, I promise. Even today, thinking back on all the manga and anime I've watched, I've never in my leisure read a story that's demanded so much from its audience.
Come on now.
In a way, I think this is sort of like mutual respect. Isayama is making the story as rich and as dense as it needs to be in order to tell this story faithfully, and he trusts us to look and listen closely. With the added benefit of this being, when you sit back and decide you want to watch the series again, it plays out almost like an entirely different experience. With the power of hindsight, you'll notice suspicious conversations with Annie, and even during the training core, Eren's Titan healing on full display as the steam freely floats from his head after he takes that notorious fall with his ODM gear. And all of this is only possible to enjoy on a second viewing, which is really where the phenomenal power of Attack on Titan's writing can be fully appreciated.
ジョーこのまま何の役にも立てずに
That's amazing. That is so funny. Oh.
死ぬのでしょうか
Levi is a phenomenal and traditional
The human Beyblade. Oh, Levi's amazing. Levi's so cool, and the no regrets side story is boss as well.
shonen character. After being introduced to him and his no-nonsense treatment during the first half, during this particular section, Levi proves to be one of the most important characters for us as an audience to understand and connect with. In a story where bucking the tropes became a regular occurrence, having a familiar and easier to understand character like Levi felt a little bit like home to me. And while I wouldn't consider Attack on Titan a show that has made me emotional very often, the only character that's managed to evoke that sort of connection from me has been Levi, and they got an emotional response from me once in the manga and twice in the anime through his character. Little scenes like exploring how Levi would react towards his subordinates' deathbeds, grabbing their hands, or retrieving something for them after a hard-fought battle. These stand in direct contrast with the nonchalant tough guy persona he admonishes on the surface. He's fun to watch for his Titan-slaying abilities, yes, but he's easier to cheer for because we understand who he is very easily.
It was like a nightmare that was paid for me, 'cause nobody wants to die too fast.
Unfortunately, Isayama leverages that fact too in the story very quickly.
君には何が見える？敵は何だと思う？
In 2013,
That spawned so many memes as well. It's like, what? Oh yeah, sorry.
this captured my mind like few other instances I can think of. Having focused so intently on the conflicts with the perilous outside world, I never considered that there would be a noteworthy threat inside the walls.
Yeah.
Mysteries are the bread and butter of Attack on Titan, and as such, these mysteries depend on the story's ability to adhere to the rules established within the world they take place. If you break existing rules, the audience feels cheated. If you didn't give the audience enough information, they feel cheated. If it doesn't make sense in the end, the audience feels cheated, and rightfully so. In this journey outside the walls, Erwin's plan and Annie's infiltration as the traitor Erwin's looking for is handled to near perfection. A sign of a great reveal, surprise, or mystery is seen in how our impression of the characters involved either changes or remains the same. If a surprise is handled poorly, normally it falls due to the incompetence of a particular villain or a flub by the writers looking to work their way out of a hole that they've created. In Dragon Ball Super's Goku Black Arc, tons of time is spent establishing how time travel works, how the final battle is set up, and how it resolves. But in the end, under its own logic, it
didn't
still
really make
makes no
sense.
sense,
Yeah.
leaving fans to think that the characters are either strange, foolish, or nonsensical, which is exactly what Attack on Titan didn't do here. Instead of providing the necessary exposition to us through dialogue, we're instead shown how this mystery works and where all the pieces for this puzzle were. Because everything in Attack on Titan that isn't addressed works under real-world logic. It makes sense as to why Erwin surprised Eren and asked him if he knew who the traitor was right after Bean and Sunny were killed, because Eren couldn't have been involved and was with Hanji all night talking about Titan theory. In addition to that, Erwin releases potentially sensitive information regarding Eren's basement in Shiganshina because he wants the next expedition to involve this traitor he suspects of being in their midst.
Yeah, wants them to be there, wants them to actually be there, and then wants to be able to like figure it out.
And he feeds everyone incorrect information regarding the position of Eren, all in an effort to corner the female Titan in the forest. As we watch this and as we break this down even, the entire operation that Erwin has concocted here comes across as ingenious for him despite his ultimate failure, which came about due to his lack of information concerning the female Titan's secret abilities.
Yeah, like they didn't know. So then that also made sense because like if they had known that, then he probably would have done something about it. And it makes sense, and it's just so cool. It's just awesome. It's like, then now, everything goes into panic mode, and it's like, well, how do we handle this now? Because we still haven't figured out who the traitor is, but they've escaped.
And so, in the end, this scene serves to successfully paint Erwin as the risk-taking strategic genius he's supposed to be written to be. And we know this because it was demonstrated, not because we're told that he's amazing, but because we see it for ourselves. And in addition to being shocked when I watched this unfold my very first time, and my second time all the way through, it further served to divert my attention inward and look at the rest of the cast as possible threats, instead of exclusively looking outside the walls for humanity's enemy. And speaking of humanity's enemies, the fight that takes place in the forest between Annie and Eren somehow manages to make Eren look monstrous, terrifying, and awe-inspiring without him landing so much as a single significant strike. Just a whole bunch of misses, grazes, and one admittedly heavy, but still blocked gut punch by Annie. And again, even here in the moments where you would think that things would be more straightforward, Attack on Titan's foreshadowing strengths are still being followed through right. This is the moment Eren hesitated and revealed his humanity, and it resulted in yet more loss and more suffering for those he cared about, which I think is essential to keep in mind for now. Furthermore, and somewhat interestingly, almost immediately after Eren suffers a skull-shattering loss and kidnapping to Annie, in trying to take the initiative, Mikasa ultimately highlights her flaw. Calm and composed most of the time, but as soon as Eren's
Yeah, as soon as it comes down to Eren, she just loses it, man. She just can't help herself.
life is put at risk, she throws caution to the wind and places her life on the line. Which again, something like this would be rewarded in most shonen, but not Attack on Titan. Instead, Levi is there to reprimand her and to further highlight how unreasonable she's being. By this time, Levi had lost his entire squad on this mission, and Mikasa still had a chance to save Eren. Despite this, she acted hastily, and as a direct result of that foolishness, injured humanity's best human weapon, Levi. Despite the promising results that surfaced from a fantastic writing effort on Isayama, in the end, this outing highlighted how woefully underprepared they all were for the enemies beyond the walls, and all the more humanizing as after their efforts, they returned to insult, despair, and ridicule. This entire sequence is honestly phenomenal and gets better the more you watch it. The level of detail and polish in this story is frighteningly precise, and the visuals are stunning. Assault on Stohes. One aspect of this story that honestly struck me as an improvement over the mangas was how it slightly changed scenes, included new ones, and improved the flow of information to the viewers such that the dramatic moments became all the more dramatic. One very clear instance where I leapt from my seat with joy was with Eren being eaten in episode 5. By the time that happened in the manga, we really hadn't spent all that much time with Eren as a character, and it felt as though, if that was it, his time spent was somewhat pointless. And thus the feeling that this was really it for Eren felt less likely as a result in the manga. There was no sort of closure, apart from the Titan's mouth. But however, in the anime, by the time Eren meets his cruel fate, he had become something of an emotional leader within his friend group and training corps. In other words, he had impressed upon Mikasa and Armin enough to make it a possibility that he in fact could have died and served a purpose within the greater narrative, which is, I think, why this scene worked as well as it did for so many as a fake out in the anime. And similarly, regarding Annie's fight with Eren in Stohes, in the manga, right before he transforms in retaliation to Annie, Eren finds himself unable to become a Titan. But after some brief reflection and some sobering words from Mikasa, he erupts from beneath the floor and lands a massive blow onto Annie. This is perfectly fine, but I think the anime did it slightly better, while also playing into the themes and future fate of Eren's character in eye-opening ways.
Oh wow, that is some goddamn foreshadowing there.
In the anime, the flair for the dramatic is emphasized even further. He can't transform for longer, we learn why, and all the while he gets trapped and impaled beneath some rubble. Due to this unforeseen hiccup, the military and his friends all have to scramble for a contingency plan while he has his reservations. All of these delays and grim circumstances compound the initial vision of that scene in the manga, and once Eren does transform, we don't see it. All we see are flashes of him running past buildings, windows shattering, and the fragile environment of Stohes crumble to the intensity that he's charging with. The first time we see Titan Eren is
With a punch.
Not only is this the first time we see his Titan form in this scene, but it's the first time he lands a meaningful attack on Annie ever. And all of these factors culminating in this one scene make it one of the most satisfying punches in the season. Furthermore, this fight acts as a perfect mirror image of their initial fight during the forest battle, wherein Eren was very much unable to land a single significant strike, all the while Annie, who was without the function of her arms for much of the fight and the function of her left eye, managed to use Eren's own attacks against him. But in the battle for Stohes, Eren is very much a monster.
Yo, he's all over that. She's trying to get away. It's just like, yo, where do you think you're going?
His prey as Annie runs for her life. Interestingly, and this is my favorite observation regarding the final fight scene with Annie, is that Eren's momentary brief hesitation right as he was about to consume Annie is the reason she was able to seal herself away in the safety of her Titan heart.
Right,
Armin even reiterates these exact sentiments to him after the battle during the closing moments of the season 1 finale episode, implying that if Eren were to have completely abandoned his humanity and become nothing but a weapon fighting on behalf of humanity, things could have turned out different. However, the fact that Annie was the first to be reprimanded and outed as a traitor, forced to seal herself away in a crystal, is just one of the many tragic and horrific things that befall our main cast in this long and twisted story. If the conclusion of the Battle of Stohes District has taught us anything, it's that we've taken the first step to scratch the surface of this cruel world's mysteries.
Yo. And then it just ended, man, and then there was a long wait.
Okay, time out. There's a Titan behind the wall.
Yeah, there is.
Okay, so not only are there enemies outside the walls, not only are there enemies inside the walls, but there are enemies also
In the walls.
inside the physical walls. When I first saw this was just the most impossible to comprehend at the time plot swerve that I not only didn't see coming, but once again convinced me that I still know only a fraction
Yeah.
of what this world really has to offer. And the worst part is, it went on hiatus for 4 years.
Was that how long we waited? God. Yeah, well, the manga was still going though as well.
For what I imagine are a large majority of fans, Attack on Titan's unique animation sits as one of the defining and most beloved aspects of the show. From the very first moments of episode 1, audiences are greeted by an astonishing piece of animation as the Survey Corps Spider-Man their way through the forests to take down a Titan. There's this
It does look amazing like that. It was Wit. Was it Wit? Yeah, it was Wit Studio, wasn't it, that did the first season? And the second? And third? Was it Mappa just took on the last season? But yeah, they did such a good
sense
job.
of three-dimensionality to the movement, and I'm not just talking about the gear. This scene is our first introduction to arguably the most important name attached to this franchise, and the man responsible for crafting Attack on Titan's trademark action? Arifumi Imai. Whether you know his name or not, you will have almost certainly fallen in love with his work on the show, as near enough every iconic scene stems from his hands. Even if you're watching this video with zero exposure to Attack on Titan, you will have most likely seen his work on the likes of One Punch Man, Boruto, Vinland Saga, and countless other popular
Mate,
shows.
Vinland Saga is so freaking good.
Heck, maybe you've seen his viral fan animation of Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, because somehow that's a thing, and it's amazing. The man is honestly everywhere, and it's no surprise that he's become a bit of an industry icon in recent years. However, it's a very specific type of animation that he brings to Attack on Titan, and it's that combination of 3D backgrounds and 2D animation that creates the wild camera work and Beyblade madness that
It
defines
looks
the show.
incredible.
In the pre-production
Let it
stage, the
rip.
action sequences of Attack on Titan were originally going to be entirely 3D. The show's
Oh.
3D director, Shuhei Yabuta, presented the team with a fully 3D action scene that seriously impressed the staff. The series director, however, Tetsuro Araki, someone who I'll be touching on a little later, wasn't quite as impressed. He wanted the best of both worlds and insisted on merging traditional animation with the
the
CG
3D.
action.
Right.
Combining 2D and 3D is actually not a new concept, and its roots can be traced all the way back to 2003 in Naruto's original series. A director by the name of Toshiyuki Tsuru pioneered the concept, and its first major appearance can be found in Naruto's 48th episode in the iconic
Rock Lee.
battle between Gaara
My
and
guy.
Rock Lee.
Yeah.
Over the
Sorry,
years,
Rock
it's
Lee
become
Gaara,
more and
my
more
guy.
prominent, with it even making an appearance in Dragon Ball's revival movie Battle of Gods.
I feel like Ufotable will do an amazing job with it with the Fate series, with like Fate Unlimited Blade Works and Zero.
Despite, however, having a decade to rise in prominence, the workflow to achieve this type of animation never really found any sort of logical consistency, and that resulted in some hilariously backward tedium. You see, for a normal animated scene, the typical workflow is as follows. An animator will draw what is called a layout, which is essentially a very rough version of the scene used to convey to your director what your intentions are and to show the background team what they need to paint. After this, you animate it properly, and then it's all composed together for the final version. This is all done on pencil and paper up until the coloring stage, and that's the norm in the industry, contrary to popular belief. So when Imai popped up and started talking about 3D backgrounds and wild camera work, the typical workflow, it had to be thrown out the window. Imai begins his scenes with a very rough layout that showcases how he'd like the animation to play out.
Colossal.
This is then processed onto the 3D background team, who will model this scene and animate a camera fly through for Imai to use to draw his animations within. This is where it gets kind of hilarious though. Instead of transitioning from pencil and paper to a tablet and drawing over the 3D fly through, the team would print out the individual frames of the sequence, draw the animation over it, and then scan it all back in.
Whoa! Yeah, that's crazy.
This went on for months. They kept using this backwards workflow until an animator called Shinta Yamaguchi, who wasn't even involved in this production, saw what they were doing and essentially said, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life, why don't you just all start drawing digitally?" And, well, that's exactly what they did. Imai transitioned over to using a tablet, and the workflow became infinitely easier from the next season onwards. This bizarre and backwards approach is honestly largely a reflection of the studio behind the series at this point in time. Wit Studio is a subsidiary of the very famous production IG, responsible for the likes of Ghost in the Shell, Standalone Complex, and Psycho Pass. It was founded by a man called George Wada in 2012, and Attack on Titan was their very first series. Despite the prestige of being under a banner like IG Port, the higher-ups didn't really know what they were doing, or perhaps more critically, didn't really care. Now, that's a bold claim, but it's not unsubstantiated. Season 1 ran for 25 episodes, but the schedule and number of in-house staff available simply weren't enough to handle such an action-heavy series alone. And unfortunately, George Wada didn't care, going as far as to say in an interview, "All the animators are sitting at their desks all day and all night. What saves them from depression is one positive comment from a fan," as though this all made it okay.
Oh God, wow, no.
This lack of preparation and disregard from the higher-ups put a real strain on the show and resulted in 9 episodes being outsourced, as well as the need for a recap episode halfway through. In particular, the show's 13th episode fell to pieces, with some cuts not being finished in time, resulting in some of the most bizarre, nonsensical sequences, coloring mistakes, and questionable art. And while this issue persisted through the series, resulting in a huge number of corrections for the Blu-ray, it really came to a head in this episode and goes a long way in explaining the need for a recap immediately after. However, in spite of these horrific circumstances behind the scenes, the show was a gigantic success, with its animation being at the forefront of many fans' praises. Which begs the question, how is that possible then? Well, thankfully, Attack on Titan is blessed with a very strong core staff of recurring animators, many of which there's just simply not enough time to cover. We've touched on Imai already, but another big name is Asayuki Ibara, who, much like Imai, works with 3D camera work, but also has a real talent for character acting. The exceptionally exaggerated melodrama seen here is another of these defining Titan traits, and that stems from the series director Tetsuro Araki. Originally behind the Death Note anime, fans of that show will be immediately familiar with his ability to turn the most mundane conversations into big, loud, dramatic set pieces. It doesn't matter what's happening, Araki will find a way to turn it into nail-biting goodness. And I think that distinctive, unabashed style of direction plays a large part in why this series gripped so many people back in the day. I mean, it's kind of hard to tear your eyes away from the screen when you're being yelled at. And
I suppose that's very true. You've got so much emotion being just thrown at you, you're drawn in.
His style aside, Araki's long-standing reputation within the industry meant he had a wealth of contacts to bring in as guest animators to elevate the series' visuals. Episode 7 was outsourced to Studio Pierrot, which is a funny coincidence given Naruto's indirect influence on the action. This choice brought in the iconic Naoki Kobayashi animating Eren's transformation. Likewise, Episode 7 brought in Hironori Tanaka, an absolutely legendary animator whose work you will have seen across dozens of stunning shows, and he animated the devastating debut of Eren's Titan form, showing off his ability to animate powerful humanistic movement and delicate character expression. Now, of course, a series cannot survive on strong action scenes alone if everything else looks potato, so thankfully for Attack on Titan, it's blessed with distinctive designs and a strong animation director to keep the show on model. While every anime needs a character designer to adapt its manga counterpart into a version that works for animation, Isayama's artwork at this point in the series was not as refined as later in the series, to say the least, usually featuring a lot of hatching and really rough lines, and thus this would require a dramatic overhaul to work for anime, and that's where Kyoji Asano comes in. As character designer, he turned Isayama's designs into polished model sheets for animators to reference. In particular, he used very thick outlines to reflect the bold line work of the manga, while simultaneously making alterations to figure and form for more competent anatomy and recognizability from character to character. In the chief animation director role is Satoshi Kadawaki, a very talented animator who used to work at Kyoto Animation before moving to production IG, and eventually WIT. His job here is to ensure adherence to the model sheets, but also to ensure expressions are solid and animation moves the best it can. With these two together, a solid roster of regular animation directors at their disposal, and a powerful group of recurring action animators, Attack on Titan's first season succeeded despite its horrific circumstances behind the scenes.
That's so bizarre, but like, wow, what a team.
It's a triumph against the odds, and while it wasn't without its pitfalls as we've addressed, it still managed to gain a reputation at the time as one of the coolest looking shows around.
God, everyone talking about it. It was the biggest thing. like there, it's the biggest thing going. I went to London Comic Con that year, and that was everything, just about it. Everyone was dressed up in Attack on Titan costumes. The 3 heads of which studio were there. I queued up, got their autographs. I've got the first volume in the manga with their autographs. Mate, it was just,
The polished Blu-ray version readily available these days, these pitfalls are largely relegated to the distant memory of the broadcast version now only found on streaming sites like Crunchyroll.
Right.
But this is just season 1, and as the series eventually pushed onwards into new material in 2017, spectacular new visual and narrative spectacle took center stage once again. The meteoric rise of the series had been stunted by the 4-year wait for season 2, and so the question on everyone's minds at the time was, could Attack on Titan capture that same lightning in a bottle feeling in their sophomore outing? The answer? No. They could only do better.
yeah. I was so hyped. As soon as it's like season 2's happening, I was like, yo.
Season 2 of Attack on Titan took a great series and transformed it into one of the best I'd ever experienced. Bathed in failure, mystery, and tragedy much like its predecessor, however, this time, there's a small glimmer of hope on the horizon. Clash of the Titans. Clash of the Titans is the longest story arc we've yet covered in this review, spanning an entire season and almost 5 volumes of its manga, where the prior season consisted of mainly easily identified mini-arc beginnings and endings. Clash of the Titans continues on from the events in the last, but in doing so covers one massive incident that unfolds over the course of many flashbacks and earth-shattering revelations.
Mate, we get so many revelations.
Because my adoration for the twists and surprises of this series potentially border on the insane, what I want to draw attention to and praise first of all is that it gives a much needed exploration into the many side characters surrounding our main trio of Armin, Mikasa, and Eren.
Yeah, like, we definitely need more time with them, especially considering what happens later on. Like, oh my god.
And how does it achieve this? Well, through intense conflict. While I didn't recognize, or at the very least didn't fully appreciate this on first viewing, what I later found interesting about revisiting Season 2's opening section is that a considerable portion of the story takes place during the events that comprise the assault on Stohes district covered in Season 1. Which means all of this is taking place while Eren is dealing with Annie and its aftermath. Who would have thought that this wasn't the most shocking and awesome thing happening at that time? And it's all made possible thanks to the considerate and careful use of flashbacks by Hajime Isayama. And I like this choice for the same reason I'm keen on the use of One Piece's flashbacks and the various means with which Oda opts to introduce us to and come to better understand the surrounding area for its viewers and readers in any given location. One of the most challenging aspects when writing a story is creating or manifesting a world or atmosphere that feels real or potent enough for you to identify with or imagine yourself within.
Oh mate, Sky Pier was just phenomenal. I loved it.
If you're not interested in the world the story is taking place in, then you may very well be pushed away or left disinterested, making world building not only one of the more difficult pieces of narration to effectively employ, but also one of the most crucial. Thankfully, however, Isayama does a phenomenal job in this department, and in this season I noticed just how effective he can manage to be when it comes to using the flashbacks as a vehicle for this. It forced me to stop thinking of this world as a set of scenes where nothing is happening in the background, and instead a deep and dynamic world full of consequence and danger around every corner. If Annie and Eren were fighting, then where were the others? What were they doing? Personally, I'm someone that at all costs tries to avoid spoilers, and when I heard that Season 2 was coming, I hid like there was no tomorrow from all of my social medias for ages.
I mean, I'm quite surprised I didn't get spoiled on anything Attack on Titan wise. Like, even the ending, I didn't get spoiled on any of that. Avoided it. So, yeah, I'm so glad.
And the result was the utter shock and awe I felt when I first laid my eyes on the Beast Titan. I didn't know Mika as a character all that well, but as the number 2 of the scouts behind Levi in skill, getting to witness the fate that befell him as the Beast Titan interrogates and ultimately disposes of him with truly horrifying in all the best ways. Furthermore, after having outed Annie as a shifter, I was fully anticipating the next individuals that would come to the surface to be the armored and colossal titans. However, instead, Isayama opted to show this brand new hairy boy, making me feel all sorts of intimidated and confused at the same time. I was unsure as to what was going on and where this story was even going at this point. Exactly where he wanted me to be.
Yo, he knew.
However, this is where things got a little more complicated than they had been thus far in the story. Having to jump to and fro from point of view character to point of view character as they survey the neighboring towns to help evacuate and to try to locate the hole, all the while being sucked into flashback after flashback, I think particularly in the anime, which added even more flashbacks than the manga had already, served to kill the pacing for me in some areas, as well as sprinkle some confusion in there on my first viewing. Despite this, I still think that what's added offers more positive than negatives by a wide margin. I'm not sure if I mentioned it yet, but I love Sasha, and
she's great.
I love these chapters specifically. Once again, Isayama didn't explain to me why she was worth admiring or showing respect for, but instead demonstrated to us why she is a phenomenally courageous and interesting character, all in her own scene, rich with backstory, immediate conflict, and moments of true altruistic heroism. Now, after season 1, I enjoyed Sasha's character. I thought her comedic potato bit that made everyone meme about it was fun, but the primary reason I found my initial fondness for her was after what she did to save Samuel. However, with that said, she was still comfortably at that point in the category of needs more spotlight in order for me to fully engage with her as a character. And boy, in this season, does she. I love this self-contained episode so much, I'm inclined to say that it's the dark horse for best episode amidst the supremely strong season's other installments. In this one episode, I went from feeling lukewarm on Sasha to her being one of my favorite characters, with a flashback that explores how and why she came to overcome her prejudices regarding outsiders, figuring out where the importance of community and kindness truly lies, and we see Sasha change from someone who would have once ran to protect herself, and contrast that with a Sasha that we now can see makes use of the strengths that she has to protect others that cannot protect themselves. It's a powerful story with some horrific and beautiful imagery. It's emotional, it's tense, and it's probably my favorite episode from this season, but not my favorite piece of character development. The beginning of this arc is quite dynamic and somewhat frantic, given that the scouts are largely fractured into smaller groups, each with their own individual missions concerning evacuation and checking out the wall for breaches. Top to bottom, some of the imagery, particularly in the dark of the night, as the scouts worry about what might be lurking out there and the dark of the dingy castle they eventually find themselves in, all of this, both in the manga and the anime, serves to really capture the horror aspect of the series. And it's in these moments of panic we finally get to explore a character that up until this point hadn't even received a name in the manga yet. And that person is Ymir. Once again, I have to admit that when I first dove into season 2, the individual smaller scope character flashback stuff left me somewhat unsatisfied. And to tell you the truth, if you had asked me a few years ago after my first viewing which I preferred, season 1 or 2, I think I might have said season 1 quite confidently. However, now, after having revisited it and after having taken a closer look at how it works, I adore this dynamic Ymir is shown to have with Historia, who up until this point I had only ever really known as the nervous girl that gave Sasha help during training that one time. However, what's interesting about them isn't necessarily their communication or what their personalities are that made their dynamic so fruitful within the story for me. It's instead how their characters clash and inform the arc they're each undergoing separately. In other words, it makes sense why Ymir is the way that she is, and thus makes sense why she is drawn to Historia. And through a very eye-opening flashback, we see that the sweet girl of Historia is actually willing to kill herself, and by extension Daz, just to appear like a good person to the others before she dies. And on the other side of the coin, Historia eventually recognizes the weakness in Ymir that she didn't think that she has. Neither of them are living for themselves, however their respective dynamics and challenges push each other to become more well-rounded and secure characters. Upon second and third viewings, I enjoyed their portion of the story so much that I'd even posit that there's a strong argument to be made that their journey and story in this season is easily the most underappreciated component of it. Taking two characters, one of which I hadn't even heard of and another that I had almost totally forgotten about, managing to explore their lives and backstory so brilliantly that I ended up not only caring about them but also found it to be immeasurably fascinating when breaking it all down upon my revisit. And also, this was awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
This is a small and somewhat surface level observation, but this instance among many others helped me appreciate that this season gave me much more than I was anticipating. Even on my first go around, the series had already hooked me with its premise and its existing Titan thread alone, but the fact that this continued to drip feed more and more information, leading to different and newer Titan shifters being revealed, felt exhilarating to sit and gawk at in amazement. The Beast Titan and now this new gremlin-like Titan that Ymir is brandishing to defend the castle with gave me more questions than I ever could have dreamt of.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Because then you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then like, oh,
Particularly after Reiner confronts Ymir as she reads some supplies she finds in the castle, brandishing a language those within the walls apparently shouldn't be familiar with.
Yeah.
At that point, I'm like, what does that even mean? Who are these people? Where did these supplies come from? Why can they transform? Why do they all look different? Why do some of them want to take out humanity within the walls, and why do others defend them? And what would have happened if Ymir wasn't there to have made the save then?
I mean, I love that. I love that second time around where you see he was going for it. He was going for the bite. Oh.
I'm sorry in advance for my gushing regarding this upcoming section, but this literally brought Attack on Titan from a 9 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10 for me. And look, listen, I adore One Piece, but it wasn't my first love. Attack on Titan gave me that big, heavy foreshadowing surprise first, and for that reason, it will always hold a special place in my heart.
And we're back.
So, get this right, I adore this scene, more than I thought was humanly possible for a man to love flashing colors on a digital screen. I was unreasonably excited.
Yeah.
Okay, it's happening.
But that came with problems. Not with the execution of the story, those are... Okay, no, we don't talk about improving this scene, it's perfect. The problems I had came about because Season 2 took so long to come out. Instead of watching this scene with my friends and family that I had before, I was watching it alone. And
oh.
I had no one to talk about
Yeah. It's like, wait, what? Oh my god, you guys,
this earth-shattering revelation with. In a way, despite my forever alone set of circumstances at the time, this yielded a massive benefit in that it forced me to reconvince my family and friends to pick up the series again, which meant that I too would watch along with them. And that's when I realized that to fully appreciate this series, it needs to be consumed once blind and then rewatched as you're armed with all the greater understanding the plot has provided you with. Never, in all of my life, up until that point, had I been as blown away by a story. This show that I had been such a massive fan of for 5 years at that point demonstrated to me that not only was it brilliant, but it was so in ways I never once noticed. These unveiling or mask-off moments for the characters of Attack on Titan are among the most expertly and carefully handled that I've come across. Certainly the most numerous. And Isayama achieves this by perfectly managing what the audience is explicitly told and implicitly told. In short, explicitly informing your audience of a given plot point is exposition. This can be seen through Annie outing herself as the female Titan, through Eren popping out of his Titan's nape, or Levi showing us that he's a great soldier. These are all pieces of information that explicitly inform us through no uncertain terms that Annie is the female Titan, Eren is also a Titan shifter, and Levi is a badass. But this isn't what impressed me. Tons of stories have these climactic moments of revelation, but what makes them work or brilliant, however, is how they are foreshadowed through implicit information being strategically given to us throughout the story. To put it simply, implicit pieces of info are the uncertain but curious behaviors or choices made by certain characters or components within your story that, if you had been paying attention or suspicious, could very easily have pointed you in the direction of their true intention. And it's through this analysis of when and how this use of implicit communication we begin to understand the scope of the story and the benefits an author like Isayama can enjoy when he understands how the story is going to end from day one. This is why Attack on Titan is a show worth watching from the start a second time, at the least. It's an entirely different experience. Running back through the story with my friends and family, now armed with an understanding of who was who and where the story was going, my mind was free to pay attention to details outside of the plot. I was left utterly speechless and in awe of the sheer number of implicit hints I missed out on. Whether it be Keith Shadis waltzing right past all of the Titan shifters on induction day, their curious placement in the second OP, how suddenly interested Reiner was in Eren's Titan before we knew it was Eren, how Annie found out where Eren was in the scouting formation in the end, all of the sketchy hint-filled conversations they have, and can we talk about the cans again? All those are only a small few of the dozens of hints we were given concerning the true nature of Reiner, Bertholdt, and Annie. However, for many, Reiner and Bertholdt's ultimate reveal as the culprits behind Shingen Shina's fall stand as some of the most unique and shocking the series has to offer.
Absolutely sick. That reveal was just like, no. As soon as he's having the conversation and talking about Reiner's like, we need to. Oh, yeah. And Bertholdt's like, are you sure? Are you sure? It's like, what are you talking about? No, you can't be.
I spoke about the director of this series briefly before, but his flair for the dramatic really helped to elevate, for comparison's sake, Annie's mask-off moment and soon-to-follow transformation thereafter in Season 1. It's cinematic, and it's a thunderous moment for what might be Annie's biggest moment in the series. However, with regards to Reiner and Bertholdt,
Just like, what? What?
何言ってんだお前。
何を言っているんだライナー
this reveal broke my brain.
It's the way that he do it. He's just casually telling him. Like, what?
And I think it did so for two very important and clearly identifiable reasons. The most obvious identifier within this revelation has to be how understated it is. When set alongside other important moments in the series, even other big revelations like Annie's, the difference in staging is clear for all to see. It's clear that the director of this episode wants there to be a chance that you could have missed this moment entirely. It's not the focus of the scene, and even in the manga, Isayama has Reiner reveal all of this information to Eren in the background, with the focus being on other
Wow.
characters.
Oh, right, so they did it that way as well. Oh my god.
This serves to put us as audience members into the minds of the scouts. Much like many of them, we did not see this being the time or
No.
place for such a reveal, and certainly not in such a straightforward manner, which ultimately serves to create the second and most powerful component that makes this scene work like it did, and that's contrast. Due to the low-key nature of the unveiling, once things start to kick off with Mikasa almost killing them both, their ultimate transformations are made to feel all the more monumental and titanic thanks to this very understated build-up. And to paint a picture for you, I was off my seat dancing and cheering as Eren lamented the loss of his friends and shifted
And then
into a
changed,
savage,
yeah, oh
anger-filled
my
titan
God.
lunging forward with intent to kill. Worth mentioning at this point also is that there's a marked improvement in this section's manga material compared to the earlier volumes, where the artwork was, to Isayama's own estimations, memorably bad. In these sequences, however, the panels are emphatic and thoughtfully composed. So much so that during my research for this video, I, for the first time in my research, got sucked into reading further than I needed to on more than one occasion. But unfortunately, this improvement in the manga comes at the cost of the anime's adaptation. While I think 3D can be used well to complement 2D animation in a variety of interesting ways if handled correctly, I do not think that what Season 2 and even what later on in the series demonstrates can be described as anything other than immensely distracting. And that's me being charitable, made all the more evident as it stands in direct contrast with
The way that, the Colossal is animated is really, really different in it.
one of the most well-animated fight sequences the series has to offer. Reiner versus Eren.
It's the way as well that like Eren's Titan starts doing all the holds and the twists and that against him and like breaking the armor off. Like, yes, there we go.
There's a great story being told here of how Eren is forced to employ restraint, strategy, and patience to contend with the stronger and more durable armored Titan. All the while, the scouts
It is called the Armored Titan, you know what I mean?
have to figure out...
Burn to the ground
Yeah, I don't think I've been more amped up for a fight than I was for Eren versus Reiner, and I certainly have never seen a fight like this attempted in an anime before.
Yeah, so sick. Look at that, man, the way he kicks his leg around and throws him down.
And while in recent years I have broadened my horizons in that regard, I have yet to see a fight handle mixed martial arts better and more impressively than this did. Like today, I watched two MMA guys break down this very fight, and it was awesome. Did you
wow.
know that this takedown that Eren does was called an Osotogari? Well, I do now, and it's thanks to these guys and Attack on Titan, I guess.
Cool.
Takedowns, triangle chokes, arm bars, guillotines, and variations on takedown defense. This fight takes all the components of a fight that more casual observers might describe as boring in MMA, and throughout this fight educates a general audience on the strategy utility and the entertainment
so
value
visually
found
class.
within a fight like this, serving not only to make a fantastic fight, but offer it a distinct and unique flavor in a series that up until this point had fights which were composed largely of kicking, punching, and missing punching.
Run away.
Within a story like this, there's always something in the future for us as an audience to hang on for. Isayama will always have a series of medium and short-term mysteries to drag us along with, like, will they retrieve Eren from the warriors? Why are they there, and who's the Beast Titan? Despite all of these at some
Constantly adding more questions, man.
point or another being answered, there is always a long-term question hanging in the air for us too. While this section is largely composed of action, intense character exchanges, massive set pieces, and one massive emotional question mark at the end, what managed to captivate me during this dynamic pursuit was less so the action and more so how nuanced and believable all of the main players behaved. Take Ymir for example. Thanks to the prior flashbacks, we understand where her allegiances lie, and thus, in talking to Reiner, she starts working with them because she believes that what Historia currently has is unsustainable, that she doesn't have a future within these walls. So not only is this a believable motivation that informs the crucial decision she ultimately makes, but it also helps to paint a grim picture for where Reiner and Berthold are from originally. There's also this tremendous character moment for Erwin, who, while leading his squad, gets taken by a Titan only to...
Get going! Oh my god, yes.
Okay, look, I know this is a fictional world, but good God almighty,
What an epic moment. He's still getting dragged away and he's like, yo, keep going. It's like, ah.
would I follow that man through the gates of hell? Another
people
example
do.
of nuance and meaning found in this sequence has to be Berthold's conflicted and guilt-ridden mindset throughout.
You'll float down there. We'll float down there. Yes, we do.
In fact, during this season, to varying degrees, both Reiner and Berthold have demonstrated that there's a possibility that there's possibly a likable person beneath the surface despite the atrocities they've committed, making the emotional torment and physical pain these two undergo in the chase all the more thought-provoking, distracting us from... Aaron, you absolute monster.
Yeah, you
Down an
badass.
arm and he still secures the target. Honestly, this entire chase sequence had me on the edge of my seat from its hopeful beginnings to its almost hopeless end. After having exhausted some tremendous strategies from Armin and Erwin, some incredible feats by Mikasa and securing Eren even, once again they are forced to deal with the harsh reality of this world. And oddly, this portion of the conclusion felt somewhat final and peaceful to me. I'm not really sure if I'm alone in thinking or feeling this, but my first go through this series, this was the one and only Eren Yeager moment to invoke some sort of emotional response from me. As I mentioned prior in this review, I believe in and respect the idea and utility of Eren Yeager's character within this series. I don't think it would work without him. He's a fundamental component to how this story functions, but he's not the most relatable. His desire to achieve his goals borders on the psychotic much of the time, and his facial expressions and threats, particularly during the treetop sequence, remind me more of Norman Bates from 1960s Psycho than a typical shonen protagonist.
Right, yeah,
but
yeah.
this scene, it hit me differently. Maybe it's the staging, maybe it's Hannes' courageous attempt to overcome his guilt and save the two kids. Maybe it's Mikasa thanking Eren for being in her life and saving her. Or maybe it's the very human moment we share with Eren as he crumbles to the floor in tears, faced with the reality that once again, despite the new powers, despite
do
all
anything,
everyone has
yeah.
done, despite all that he has done, he is still a slave to the circumstances he finds himself in. Powerless, helpless, and defenseless. Yet in the face of this, he stands up, comforts Mikasa, and faces certain death unflinchingly without fear.
And then, my god, more questions.
This got me. Knowing full well that he is going to his death, Eren remains true to himself and his convictions, proving to us that while he might be a lot at times, he believes everything he says and is willing to die fighting.
Like what? Excuse me? What just happened? What's happening?
Okay, wait, what was that? What happened,
Yeah,
and why
exactly,
is Eren
yeah.
suddenly a Titan bender? Leave it to Attack on Titan to answer a ton of questions in the single season, only to leave us with way more.
Yeah.
God, I love this moment. And what's more is this moment, on top of giving the scouts an opening for them to escape, it also gives Ymir reason to leave Historia with the scouts, because Eren proved in this moment that those living within the walls might actually have a future.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, Season 2.
Interesting. Alright, this is going to be boss. This is going to be cool. Alright.
Despite the second season being greenlit immediately following Season 1's broadcast, and huge success, it took 4 years for it to finally hit the air. Now, of course, the show wasn't in production during these 4 years, at least not in the sense of things being storyboarded or animated. The show truly didn't begin being made until late 2016, so I think it's important to talk about why it took so long to pick back up. Contrary to popular belief, the gap didn't purely exist to create a buffer between the anime and manga. All of Season 2's narrative content was entirely finished within the manga by the time the first season of the anime had finished airing.
Oh, right, okay, cool.
The primary reason was more so to do with structure. While the arc featured in Season 2 is very action-packed, filled with reveals and intense set pieces, what follows is a low-key, politically driven arc. An arc that Isayama wasn't particularly happy with, and one fans weren't hugely engaging with at the time either. Were the staff to create another 26-episode season, it would have started with a bang, yes, and then peter out into this more subdued arc thereafter.
Right.
As I'm sure you can imagine, and as the staff realized, that didn't make for a very gripping finale. And the solution was to split this sequel into what we have today, an action-packed second season followed by a political arc to kickstart a third season a year later, leading into the climactic second half of this season that would inevitably stick in audiences' minds due to the sheer number of narrative beats. While news that the second season would only be 12 episodes after many years of waiting angered fans, it ultimately turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
Yeah,
The production
it definitely worked out if you are looking at where everything, how the story beats happen.
It was significantly stronger this time around, with every single episode this time being created in-house. While the show began on April 1st, 2017, the staff had already finished episode 1 in its entirety by the end of 2016, with episode 2 already hitting the animation phase in January of 2017. It's far from perfect, but a far cry from the state of season 1. And with the popularity of that first season, this also meant many freelancers were itching to join the team, which went a long way in boosting the overall quality of this second.
True, if you wanted to get noticed, you'd want your name all over it, wouldn't you?
Outing. I mean, the famous Eren versus Reiner fight brought in some superstars such as Toshiyuki Sato, Naoki Yoshibe, and Itsuki Tsuchigami. Phenomenally talented animators who many of you will undoubtedly know from the wonderfully animated Mob Psycho 100.
mate.
Of course, the old superstar team of Ibisu Ibarra and Imai, who carried Season 1's action, make their return here in an even bigger way also, actively looking to one-up their previous efforts, taking full advantage of the show's new, forgiving schedule. And this roster of incredible action animators really can't be overstated, but the improvements don't simply exist within the action space. While Season 1's dialogue scenes largely consisted of stills with flapping mouths, Season 2 managed to introduce legitimate character acting
More
animation,
movements,
with young
right,
new talents
yeah.
like Kana Ito making characters actually feel alive during moments of downtime.
Alright,
However,
cool.
perhaps the most dramatic overhaul within this season comes in the form of Wit Studios' newfound makeup team. Between Season 1 and 2 of Attack on Titan, director Tetsuro Araki and much of the Titan team had created Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress, where this new technique was established. It involves a team of digital artists going over shots and painting in extra detail, particularly in the hair and eyes. While its use on Kabaneri was fairly haphazard, often popping up sporadically with little rhyme or reason, its presence in Attack on Titan's second season functioned largely the same as Harmony Cells did in old anime, to create dissonance in aid of impact. For instance,
cool.
the first appearance of the Beast Titan, Connie laying eyes on his family, or Historia and Emir's emotional interaction. All of these scenes stand out very literally from the rest of the series' visuals, add so much to the weight of these occasions. People will always notice when something's different, and Titan Season 2 takes advantage of this whenever it can. Unfortunately, with the many improvements Season 2 brings, there are some major caveats that are important to acknowledge also, and one of them I mentioned earlier. The 3D Colossal Titan. The team at Madbox are responsible for the series CG, and unfortunately, the work on display here is less than great. I think it's important to understand why this Titan is CG, however, and the answer is probably not all too surprising. It's entirely to do with time. In Season 1, this Titan was nothing but a static head, and any
Yeah, you didn't see the whole body, I suppose. Never really thought about that. It's just that upwards. You never see the entirety of it. Yeah, true.
action around it was minimal. Coming into Season 2 onwards, however, there are entire action sequences built around this Titan, with
Right.
complex rotations and camera movement. The issue is, the Colossal Titan's design is just as complicated as any insanely detailed mech is. It is covered in hundreds of tiny lines detailing the musculature and full of segments. Just drawing one frame of this character is difficult enough, but once you introduce any sort of movement, let alone rotations, You're then looking at hundreds of sheets that all need to be perfectly detailed and consistent in form from frame to frame. Not only is this astonishingly difficult to pull off, but that is months upon months of work that no TV production is ever going to achieve without destroying itself. Using CG is not a sin. Anyone remotely familiar with Trigger or Ufotable's efforts will know this fact perfectly well.
Yes.
Take this scene from Kill la Kill's first episode, for example. Everything here is CG, and yet you'd barely be able to tell due to the way the texture work is perfectly matched to the rest of the scene. And traditional animation timing and techniques have been employed, such as smears. Unfortunately, the CG in the Wit Studio era of Attack on Titan makes no such effort to blend, using textures that don't look remotely like the rest of the series, and linear animation timing that ultimately looks more like a low frame rate video game than the traditional frame modulation you see in 2D animation. It may allow for some spectacular sequences, but it sure comes at the cost of seamless integration.
There you go, that was weird. I was only getting it out through my right headphone then, but it's gone back to both. That's true.
The second caveat of this season is also time related. Despite the significant improvements found in Season 2's schedule, the pressures of the production did ultimately catch up to the team, resulting in dozens of animation directors per episode struggling to hold things together. The biggest example of these struggles are most apparent in episode 11, where any sort of complex piece of animation involving multiple characters were relegated to shaking stills. Nice looking stills, but stills all the same. Despite my talking about these caveats in quite a bit of detail, they're incredibly minor in the grand scheme of things, and ultimately, as of this video, Season 2 remains the strongest production the Titan series has ever seen. Some people might not even be aware that episode 10 could be called the Studio Ghibli episode of the series, with ex-Ghibli staff members Kenji Imura and Masayuki Miyagi directing and boarding respectively. And while the episode has little to write home about in terms of wild animation, the way it's storyboarded and particularly the use of lighting is absolutely unrivaled. It feels distinctly different from any other Titan episode, and when you look at the minds behind it, it's easy to see why. Araki also brought in his friend Takayuki Hirao from Studio Ufotable, best known for directing the Fifth Garden of Sinners film for the iconic 7th episode of the season, delivering on some of the season's most impactful moments. Ultimately, Season 2 was the perfect storm. It managed to iterate on and perfect the concepts found in the first season while offering up interesting new ideas and executing them with newfound finesse thanks to an improved schedule. To this day, it is still the shining beacon of the franchise, now 70 plus episodes deep. And although this consistent level of polish across the board won't be found again, the animation peaks don't stop here. Season 3 may contain the lowest of lows, but it also contains some of the most extravagant...
Mate, Kenny, like, Levi Kenny, and like, flying through the street and that is just so good. It happens so
ambitious
quick.
And unforgettable of highs. And if this poll I took on Twitter asking all of you which your favorite seasons were is any indication, I'd say this second half is something special.
Let's freaking go. This season's so freaking good.
The Uprising arc. Alright, this is going to be a tough one to fully break down, so wish me luck. Of all the arcs I've discussed, aside from this also being quite long, the differences between the manga and the anime are substantial. However, nothing that changes too much regarding the plot. In short, the anime tends to extend, rearrange, or embellish action sequences like Kenny chasing Levi in favor of shortening or removing certain dialogue scenes. I think looking at this critically, it's important to recognize the pitfalls an adaptation must try to avoid when it's creating its anime counterpart. And so, I'd imagine many of the decisions made for Season 3 Part 1 came about due to pacing concerns. And this arc boasts a really cool idea, opting to momentarily turn our attention away from the Titan threat outside the walls and to instead focus on the corruption of the world within them.
I did like this, like, we've had all that go on, and it's like, yeah, but like, what about humans versus humans now? And like, oh mate, but making it work, you know, got the gear zipping all over the place, people getting, oh my god, and still making it as brutal as fighting Titans.
With political unrest, boatloads of eye-opening exposition that unearths a massive conspiracy, and some of the most disgusting visuals.
Yeah, that was weird, that face.
This property has yet offered up to us.
Mates. Run. Get it!
For the most part, I thought a lot of the changes here were welcomed, particularly when we consider the different pacing requirements an anime might have when compared to a manga. Take episode 1 for example. It covers chapters 51, 52, 53, 54, and 57 primarily, culminating on this moment. The most notable exemptions from these chapters are the experiments on Eren's Titan and Historia's backstory on the farm. And while these aren't present in this section anymore, they are later on in the season instead. Though I will say that while we do get to see the aftermath of these Titan experiments in the anime, the manga went into much more detail, dedicating almost an entire chapter to these experiments alone, leaving lots of extra interesting pieces of information. Not essential information, but interesting nonetheless.
That is interesting, actually. Like, so they just did these things to see what he could do as a Titan, right? Okay.
Nonetheless, overall, I can appreciate and understand the necessity for these changes. It's important for a story to feel like it's moving forward, and choosing to end this episode on a sudden, shocking murder, kickstarting a chase scene with Levi, is a much more favorable cliffhanger than some expository dialogue exchange that this section is filled with. However, you might have also noticed that 2 chapters were missing from that aforementioned list of covered chapters in this first episode, those being chapters 55 and 56. This material, while not present in the same order as the manga, is presented in later anime episodes, and are either significantly less detailed or have been entirely changed. Chapter 55 is almost entirely the torture scene with Levi Hanji and the military police soldier. I think this version from the anime only served to remove a lot of the gore, with all the necessary details still remaining, and so therefore I think this is a welcome change. However, in saying that, it's not all great changes. One such removed exchange I otherwise really appreciated came from a scene wherein Levi reveals to everyone that Historia is to be made queen if their coup of the government is to be successful. Here, I think something is lost, or at the very least made much less interesting and less rich due to this creative decision. Initially, Historia resists and is overcome by the responsibility, resulting in Levi grabbing her by the scruff of her neck, willingly and happily playing the bad guy. His speech in this scene is great, and it paints him as a tough but fair person that is willing to walk the walk and talk the talk. However, the best aspect to be gleaned from this scene is a conversation that is led by Mikasa after the fact, when people start questioning or doubting Levi. In that moment, she backs up her captain and acts as the soldier she needs to be. Couple this with her asking about the condition of Levi's ankle later on the rooftop, and you've got a clearly shown progression of her character after implementing the lesson she learned that day in the forest against the female Titan. It's a subtle but great moment, and unfortunately, it's left out of the anime completely, making Mikasa feel more lifeless as a result, which is a shame because all she seems to be known for in the anime is loving Eren, which is an important part of her character, but not the only part. Overall, the changes made to the existing chapters revolved largely around streamlining conversations and combining separate scouting missions into one more focused operation that helped to tie everything together in a much more straightforward and believable way. At the end of Season 2's material, I mentioned a Twitter poll I took that pointed to Season 3 being the most liked season of them all, though I am certain had Season 3 only been this first half concerning the political uprising,
I don't think it would be. It's what happens later.
the poll would most definitely have turned out very different. And that's not to say that I thought that this section of the story was bad, or that it wasn't a great idea. Far from it, but I do however think that when set alongside all the other parts of the story, it stands out as possibly the slowest and least interesting portion for some. And while I can only speak to my own experience, I would wager that it is largely due to the lacking development and attention given to the aristocratic class and military police throughout this story up until now that plays such a large role in this section. While they have been present here and there, those moments have always been fleeting and infrequent at best. The military coup that takes place in this section is vital for making later, more interesting storylines work. It's a necessary plot point in the story, but for a great deal of time during it, while there were some great ideas and subversions to successfully pull off the coup, I was still waiting for these scenes to pass on by so that we could focus on the Rod-Reese family plot thread, which I found to be far more engaging due to its focus on primary characters and the truth of the world. And so while I didn't dislike the military coup section, I did think it was the weakest part of the story due to my lack of emotional connection to many of the key characters involved. Though that's not to say that all of these interactions are less interesting. Encounters like Jean's hesitation to take out members of the military police served as a key moment for his character and his mission to become a better leader. Also, there's this really nice scene in the woods with Jean too, and I think without getting too lost in the weeds here, my main takeaway has been that while the manga has more details and a few interesting and somewhat important instances that the anime doesn't have, it's also a version of the story that left a large portion of the reader base less interested, and it's a key part of the story which Isayama himself wasn't particularly happy with either, leading to his direct involvement with Season 3's anime adaptation. But thankfully, once the monarchy is taken down and the military gains control over the government, the plot really starts to get moving and the tension rises dramatically. The time taken to set up the chessboard the way that they wanted to has taken time, yes, and to some people may have been somewhat tedious, but thanks to it being handled the right way, none of the characters' current motivations or placements feel forced or contrived, and we can all now focus not on separate splintered points of interest, but instead one major operation: the rescuing of Eren and Historia from Rod Reese. Let's back up for a second or two here. This for me was always the main point of interest in this story. The truth behind the royal family and the coordinate power of the Titans. And interestingly, now looking back on this portion of the series, the character that holds this entire season together is Kenny Ackerman.
Yeah, man, like Kenny's such a big part of this, and
if you look back through the story at other characters that occupy a temporary role in this story, like Levi Squad, Marco, or even Hannes, these are all characters that are brought in to fulfill a minor narrative requirement, be it functional or motivational, and once they fulfill that purpose, they then exit stage left. Heck,
Yeah, they're gone.
Annie can fall into that category too. She told a story that was required of her, and now she's a crystal girl.
yeah, well, she's not dead though. She's not completely out of the story. There's still like that lingering but
My point is, this isn't some new idea in storytelling, and sometimes it can be great, like Hannes' emotionally driven multi-arc development where he contributes to the message and purpose of the arc before saying goodbye. But it can also feel a little forced. I'm not sure how I felt about this, but while I was watching season 1 on my first go around, while I enjoyed Levi Squad and found their personalities endearing, to me they were very obviously redcoats, there to serve the purpose of a
Right.
somewhat established character's death in the series. This I didn't personally get a lot out of, but it by no means hindered my ability to enjoy the season. Kenny, on the other hand, is a character that, unlike Levi Squad, plays a pivotal role in telling this story. So much so, I can't even begin to understand how it would possibly be told without him, which is exactly why I think he was created in the first place. And once the arc ends, so does Kenny. On one hand, I can appreciate his connection to Levi's past, making him a character directly linked to a fan favorite, and I also found his connection to the royal family filled with plenty of interesting interactions like the
very interesting. Like he links a lot of stuff together.
their first meeting, but I can't help but feel indifferent to him as a character. I can understand his personality fine and I can appreciate his point of view, and I found him to be exciting at times also. But at the end of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't that important to the plot of the greater series.
I don't know.
And he wasn't,
No.
in a sense. Prior to Season 3, Part 1, he doesn't exist and isn't mentioned again until Season 4's Annie, Reiner, and Berthold flashback material as a cameo. Because of this, despite Isayama's best efforts to build up a family legacy around the Ackerman name, with his connections to the Reese family and secrets of the world, Kenny, at the end of the day, seemed to me like a fleshed-out plot device, or at the very least, like he wasn't part of Isayama's vision for the series from the beginning, and instead something he concocted later on.
I mean, yeah, like maybe he just went, I need to find a way to just link all these things, and that was Kenny.
This is all to say that I do enjoy him and his part of the story, insofar as he contributed interesting opportunities for exposition and to further the plot, but as a character, however, I wasn't particularly engaged by him. I do, however, feel like I am somewhat alone in feeling this way, and Kenny seems to be something of a fan favorite amongst the fan base.
Not really. I think it was just the idea that someone would go up against Levi was pretty cool. You know, like having those fights and that, like, and these moments in the bar and everything with class. No, Kenny's not one of my favorites. I thought he was very interesting though.
Sporting a terrific design and driving the story in this section like no other. This aspect of the story was honestly my favorite part of this section, even taking giant blob titan Reese into account. The sense of scope and scale these revelations offer the series made my head spin. All those visions Eren's been having? Well, they're all thanks to this person, the passive king behind the walls. Something that really blew my mind while I was watching this was this tiny but really cool piece of continuity. If we go back to around the first time Eren transformed, it's clear to see that Eren, even back then, was utilizing memories of his father watching Frida Reese transform before he inevitably killed them, which all informed his very first transformation. Frida transformed the very same way. And Eren even back then was seeing flashes of Grisha's final moments too. It's not given much attention at all, but I appreciate it nevertheless. Consistencies shown over the course of a long-running series are what gets me to write multiple-hour video essays like like these. Of all the characters I've discussed thus far concerning this season specifically, Historia, unfortunately, is one of those characters that ended up losing more than her fair share in the aforementioned cut material, all in the name of pacing. To be clear though, I still love her inclusion in the anime. I found what part she did play to be both emotional and compelling. Climaxing on that amazing moment where she denies everything she thought she wanted her entire life in favor of staying true to the person Ymir wanted her to be and who she herself wants herself to be. It's a powerful and inspiring moment sharpened by the phenomenal musical track unique to this moment that I may or may not have listened to hundreds of times because of this very scene. Whether it be the outburst learning that they won't be going after Ymir, her conversation with Eren, her reluctance and ultimate confrontation with Levi concerning her becoming queen, all the way to her eventual acceptance. All of these moments in one form or another were either cut entirely or altered considerably.
That's crazy. That's mad. Like I said, I like that we're getting comparisons and you know, basically cut content from the anime in this. It's cool.
And not to Historia's benefit, I think. Even so, this scene in the Crystal Cave is still a powerful one where two central characters learn of their past, serving to mentally crush Eren and empower Historia. Both for totally understandable and satisfying reasons. And even though I did enjoy what the anime produced, maybe even more than the manga, I can't help but feel I cared so much more about the Historia character in the manga thanks specifically to the presence of key character moments, many of which I mentioned were cut. Still, I felt that largely Attack on Titan stuck the landing, and thanks to the wealth of exposition and plot after happening in this season so far, the story is now primed to get back to what they do best: deal with crazy as hell set pieces.
I love it. What the hell is that?
Oh my god!
Yeah, very much so. Pretty much just like, what?
Orderwood District's section of the story is honestly quite short and in my view was there to act as a coronation of sorts for Historia primarily, all the while showing off how efficient the scouts and Eren can be when they work together, free from the watchful corrupt eyes of the capital monarchy. And this has some of the most memorable set pieces in the series, I think. Rod Reese's desperate transformation into the goopy blobby island-sized titan dragging his face across the land, only to reveal that he doesn't have a face. It's gross, it's graphic, it's awesome, and it's damn memorable. And looking back over the course of this section of the story, I have to say that I admire its dedication to the political thriller it was aiming for, its perseverance in adapting an altered version of it for the anime, and it's incredibly cathartic finally getting to see and expose the injustices and corruption of the world government fall, resulting in the scouts finally being treated as the heroes they deserve to be and seen as. Erwin's reaction of the cheers and adulation of the crowd paint him as someone that, while he never anticipated or did what he did for the cheers, he most certainly appreciates them. For he knows how treacherous the next mission is going to be. Because if you thought this uprising portion was why everyone loves this arc, you'd be sorely mistaken. For what you've just seen, while great, has simply been the build-up or prelude to what I consider to be the best anime viewing experience of my life.
Mate, the Beast Titan, man. Oh my god.
Return to Shiganshina. This is the arc that made Attack on Titan my favorite story. Never, and I mean never, has a story so potently and perfectly captured my imagination the way this has. Completely satisfying my more analytical side by capitalizing brilliantly on previously established content while also educating me on things I never understood before. In other words, this was the arc that inspired me to one day write this video. And yes, it is that damn good. It has everything, and I mean that. Action, the best in the series so far. High stakes, highest so far in the series. Character progression, like we've never seen before. And that's not even to draw attention to the world building and
the seller.
Lore finally revealed in this season.
Oh, mate, the way this...
And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if this arc were a person, I would have already introduced them to my parents, gotten married, and had perfectly written children with them. There's this feeling that we've truly come full circle and transformed alongside these characters. We've begun to uncover the truths of the world, and boy are we in much more of a dominant position as a result. While watching this, I had this feeling of euphoria come over me as the scouts so effortlessly plugged up the hole in Wall Maria. Something that was once such an ordeal in Tross now is a non-issue. This is very literally the culmination of everything we've gone through so far. Eren is now fully in control of his Titan, the military are now in full control of their own efforts, and they can utilize Titan hardening. However, we are still encroaching onto enemy territory, and believe me when I say that I felt that with each passing step into this familiar location. Made possible thanks to the coffee grinder and limited remains Armin finds of a camp, despite us returning to the place where it all began, Attack on Titan managed to make this once familiar and in some ways nostalgic nostalgic location feel more alien and more dangerous than anywhere else we've come across in the story, making for strange but welcomed feelings of unease brewing in my mind. And as Armin's concerns shift from suspicion to near certainty, the tension rises gradually. This is a calm before a storm, and what a storm.
Yo, he's in the wall.
This scene made me sweat, and to this day, a show has never made me do that before. Being so close to the scouts' point of view as they slowly come to realize just how outmatched they may very well be serves to excite us, yes, but it also further places us in the corner of the characters we relate to the most. The scouts that are now cornered and fighting for their lives. For me, the highlight and what sticks out in my mind from this opening establishment has to be the sudden surprised look that falls across Erwin's normally relaxed face.
Yeah, he's like,
it's
whoa,
one of
what's
the only
going on? What's happened? Oh my god.
times we actually get to see Erwin shocked, and while brief, it was enough to send shivers down through my spine. In addition to that, I love the point of view we get to see all of this from. Because light travels faster than sound, when the Titans appear, we as an audience get to see what's happening on the ground below before Erwin hears it. It's a small detail, but it goes to show how much effort was
actually quite
put
clever.
into
Alright,
these
cool,
scenes, establishing the stakes, the setting, and positioning the upcoming conflict to be the greatest and most important fight in the history of this show. As Erwin bellows to his shaking troops, we're both hoping for the same thing, to settle it here once and for all. Humanity or Titans, which side will live, which side will perish.
Yeah,
I've sat here in my seat for 5 minutes trying to collect my thoughts and feelings on this scene and put it into words, but the level of excitement I felt that day while watching this, I sincerely cannot effectively convey. With the scouts now forced to split up against seemingly insurmountable odds, it was at this point I knew I was getting ready to witness something truly special. And before I get into the specifics like I know all of you want me to, I want to first draw attention to what I think makes this fight work so effortlessly and therefore effectively. In a nutshell, Isayama has managed our knowledge of this series such that we understand exactly the right amount to enjoy this situation to the utmost, while also withholding certain pieces of information to help us enjoy it even more. Like the Beast Titan being able to summon Titans is a great Uno reverse to surprise us with
it's
and
like,
create
what?
tension. We know what characters are and are not capable of, we know that they only have one way of getting horses over the walls, and we came to learn that earlier in the story. We know what the topographical nature of Shiganshina is and how the walls are built around it. Essentially, thanks to the time and energy spent expanding upon this world and its characters, Isayama is now free to focus exclusively on setting the stakes and positioning his individuals according to where he thinks makes the best fight. We have two teams. One is in Shiganshina, and the other is trapped outside. Both are fighting for their lives and will most likely die.
Yeah,
and
well.
whoop, there they go. And okay, so that's happening on one side of the wall. And what about the other side?
We've got Titans. Oh, everyone's back.
If you cast your minds back to any of your favorite fights from fiction, they almost always follow a somewhat similar structure. And one of the most crucial points of that structure that makes any fight's ending feel massive is a low point before the finish. Goku versus Frieza effectively achieved this by making Frieza more monstrous than Goku ever could have imagined. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure utilizes this all the time, but my favorite occurs during Dio versus Jotaro, where Jotaro almost dies trying to stop Dio. And even in more modern Western media like the Avengers films 1 to 4, they all made full use of this technique in all of their final battles. And so, in other words, the more cornered or close to defeat you can get your hero team to be,
Oh my god, yeah.
the better. And with Erwin's side in a panic and Eren's side, after almost all being completely blown to pieces thanks to Bertholt's transformation, with the world being as cruel as it is and with there being no obvious way forward to victory, as an audience member, I was sitting there in despair alongside these characters.
It's like, what are they going to do? How are they going to get out of this? You can't possibly survive this. And Erwin knows that, man.
And this is where the key mechanical differences between Attack on Titan and Dragon Ball surface. Where Dragon Ball relied on what eventually became a shonen trope in Goku getting angry and achieving a new power-up to overcome Frieza, Attack on Titan made me feel like there was sincerely no way out of this. Which made the eventual strategies employed all the more satisfying and ingenious to me. And the best part is, because Isayama wanted to have two separate battles happening on either side of the wall at the exact same time, he was able to have his cake and eat it too, making both of these brilliant climaxes work for very, very different reasons. Isayama told us what to expect with Erwin's plan against the Beast Titan, and he kept Armin's plan to stop Bertholdt largely secret. Because of this, I was able to enjoy surprise and catharsis to the highest of degrees, all within the runtime of a single episode. Erwin's plan not only doesn't rely heavily on surprise, it actively pushes against it, explicitly telling the audience what his plan is outright. But strangely, despite this episode containing some of the best action set pieces perhaps of the entire franchise, the one part that I keep revisiting to this day, time after time, is this.
死ぬんですか
Oh, this moment is something else, man.
そうだ
I don't think any scene in an anime so effectively placed me into the shoes of its characters the way this one has. And if there was any scene I would not want to be a part of, it's this one. As I watch these poor soldiers shake, vomit, and panic their way to their deaths, apart from the visceral approach taken here, I really like how this scene contrasts with Armin's plan. Not necessarily in how it's carried out, but more so in how we as an audience members participate. Armin's mission is based entirely on surprise. We know how each of the components work that make up how he solves the eventual issue. However, the ending of this is left completely up to speculation. This is what makes this scene work. And when Eren finally reveals his big revenge moment, the sense of catharsis we feel is made all the more powerful because we didn't see it coming. This is the most accepting Eren is of his current circumstances, with him believing that reacting is the best course of action right now. In other words, this is Eren when he is the most submissive to the world around him, fully taking Armin's advice in a battle that you would think he has the greatest potential for being emotionally charged within. Eren isn't in control, but he seems to be okay with that, working alongside his team to achieve what they need to. And contrasting that with the prior section where his world comes crumbling down around him as he finds out that he's really nothing special, it makes for a wonderful comparison. However, interestingly, and also in the same episode, Levi's assault on the Beast Titan is almost entirely forewarned.
Well, yeah, because like he was told by Bertolt and Reiner to look out for Levi, right? Yo.
They're not doing anything mechanically revolutionary here. In shonen, this is rather fundamental, but you'd be surprised how many screw up this common shonen action trope, or at the very least, don't make full use of it. Thankfully, however, Attack on Titan didn't fail, but instead presented to our eyeballs one of the most decisive and satisfying beatdowns ever administered in the series. But what did it do right to make this so effective? Well, it empowers us, the viewers, to some significant extent and allies us with the side we are most familiar with. Once again, to take Dragon Ball as an example, when Goku arrives right in the nick of time to make the save during the Ginyu Forces battle, Toriyama utilizes dramatic irony so effectively. We know who Goku is, we know what he's capable of, and we know how confident he is. And they have no idea what they're in for. Similarly, we as an audience have seen everything that Levi can do, how hard he's fought, and what he's lost. All building up to this one moment. A moment where Zeke doesn't know it yet, but he's just made the biggest mistake of his life.
You've made one hell of an enemy, my friend. My God.
He underestimated Levi. Compounded by brief flashback sequences where Reiner and Berthold even warn Zeke about Levi. All this serves to make this beatdown all the more satisfying for the viewer or reader, and most importantly, it only worked because we knew it was coming. The Levi battle is built upon anticipation, and the Armin plan depends on suspense and surprise to be successful. Both being incredibly well executed, it's a masterclass in the fundamentals of shonen storytelling, demonstrating how and why these tropes have become so effective and ubiquitous within the shonen and broader anime industry. To harken back to the beginning of this video where I drew your attention to this particular quote from Pete Docter of Pixar, he said, "It's that impossible struggle with no answer that makes for great stories." And you can tell that this episode's subject matter connected with a lot of people due to the sheer amount of arguing that manifested as a result of it. The debate over who ought the Survey Corps revive and inherit Berthold's Titan. Armin, the new promising strategist, or Erwin, the impressive Survey Corps commander. It's a fascinating episode and discussion if I'm being perfectly frank. The value of human life and the consequences of death playing massive roles in this create wonderfully engaging and emotional outbursts from the likes of Mikasa, Eren, and even Levi. A robust litmus test I use to gauge the competency of writing within a series is how successfully they can pull off interesting conversations for extended periods of time. There's a phenomenal episode in ReZero wherein Rem and Subaru just talk for the entire runtime.
Yeah, and yeah, wow.
And it might be my favorite episode from that series.
editor's note, there are 100 other better anime shows with the extended conversation take. ReZero's boss.
Shonen often leans heavily on action, and in some cases this can point to weak character writing or a weak story. However, by this point in Attack on Titan, the criticism that characters receive no development or that the story is aimless have to be thrown out the window. Or at least I think they do. Because it's impossible for so many people to be sucked into a debate over a long conversation with high consequences if they didn't feel a connection on some level to the characters that they stand to lose here. Particularly after Erwin had given the performance of his life, this is a difficult pill for us all as an audience.
It's tough. This is really tough, man, because you can see the struggle between them both. Obviously, Levi's got such a connection with Erwin, but then Catherine, Aaron obviously have Armin.
Swallow. We want people to be rewarded for their efforts and to one-up themselves later on like they have done so often. Many ended up disagreeing with their decision to revive Armin here. However, I thought it was not only the correct decision, but the only one that they could have made. And I think Isayama must have known that too. One of the most irritating aspects of Dragon Ball for many fans around the world is how it introduces, establishes, and bonds us to various characters over the course of its story, only to cast them to the wayside later, unceremoniously. This is what removing death as a consequence does to a series. Characters that serve a purpose need to have an exit strategy, otherwise they become parodies of themselves. Erwin's story was that of a tenacious and courageous military leader uncovering the secrets of the world in the face of ridicule and impossible odds. And in the end, he managed to lead that world to the truth. A truth that he never got the chance to see, and right before he died, he made peace with that. To me, that selfless act embodies Erwin's spirit far more than him discovering the secrets of the world and soldiering onwards in a hollow, meaningless role thereafter could possibly have done for him. Had he discovered what was in the basement, he would have had no greater purpose, whereas Armin, he still has a purpose. The basement. Imagine being so bold as to dangle a carrot in front of your audience, promising them that it would be worth it down the line. Now imagine dangling that carrot for 6 years. Now imagine that that carrot was more astounding than you could have possibly been prepared for. I've spoken
This was amazing. The way this season ended and the kind of reveal we were given absolutely blew my head. This was awesome. The subtle little kind of like, you know, initially the key doesn't open the door. It's like, what? And then Levi just kicks it open. You're kind of like, oh, well, okay, that's a bit stupid. But then when they find the drawer with the key, and it's like, oh, and then, oh, it's like, whoa.
Numerous times throughout this absurdly long video discussing how Isayama managed to pull the wool over our eyes in the name of subversions and recontextualizing his characters and world, and this does all of that just a lot better. The reveal that humanity beyond the walls is not only still alive, but also thriving and far more technologically advanced than we are, sounds like a convenient and somewhat contrived twist made only to serve as a diversion into the story's endgame. However, nothing could be further from the truth, as we had all the information we needed to predict this ourselves before it was revealed to us in episode 56. With hints dating back as far as episode 29 in season 2, a throwaway statement made in passing by the scouts in an old castle details that they discovered supplies likely left behind by bandits recently. However, it's soon revealed that Ymir can read the unfamiliar language on the canned herring left behind, which is a saltwater fish. These supplies in question were left by the Beast Titan, who made an appearance just one episode prior very close to this location, making it obviously not a coincidence. Keeping these supplies in mind, let's look ahead to episodes 52 and 50, where we see Zeke, Reiner, and Berthold drinking coffee, and the remains found by Armin of this camp show the coffee grinder I mentioned. Going back all the way to episode 29, it's clear to see that a similar antique coffee grinder was used in this campsite. The anime puts heavy emphasis on this coffee grinder also, placing it in the warrior flashback in episode 35, the OP of season 3's second part, and even giving it its own info card.
Oh, mate.
This coffee grinder is of vital importance to this mystery because we know that coffee is a tropical export with a short shelf life, meaning it cannot grow in climates seen in this series which frequently feature snow. This explains why Armin, when he discovers the campsite in episode 50, doesn't know what it is, instead referring to it as black tea. This tropical requirement of coffee implies that where the warriors are from has to be very far away from the land within the walls or has access to it through imports from other countries, explaining the presence of the now newly imported coffee and the saltwater herring through commercial fishing. Ymir is also a supremely valuable character in this story for this sort of exposition exposition. She describes the Beast Titan as a monkey in episode 34, an animal that Eren had never heard of before, once again due to the climate that they reside within. However, as an audience, we know what a monkey is and therefore never make the connection.
Yeah, why would we? Yeah, why would we? It's so... I love this.
The same goes for coffee and herring. We just never associate it with anything significant because we know what it is and the characters don't really need to tell us anything. Furthermore, it's made known to us that humanity has been behind the walls for 107 years, with those in charge keeping technology secret. When we see Marley for the very first time through Grisha's eyes, we are met with the technologies placing Marley somewhere in the 1930s of our world, meaning the world within Paradise resembles that of a military nation from the early 19th century, which, taking into account the rivals we saw in season 1, holds to be accurate. So now let's take a look at Zeke. Zeke makes numerous references to baseball throughout his time with us prior to the basement reveal.
True, as well, but how would they know what that is? Yeah.
However, what I didn't realize at the time was that baseball as a sport was only popularized in the mid to late 1800s, placing it far outside the scope of Paradise's understanding and once again hints towards a more modern and civilized outside world. This in addition to the numerous other Ymir flashbacks, the modern footwear worn by Zeke and Berthold in episode 49, as well as the countless talks concerning Grisha's modern medical abilities, saving everyone from a plague after appearing miraculously outside the walls one day, all paint a very clear picture once put together of an outside world that is both hostile and advanced far beyond what they are capable of on the inside. And as an audience, we were all able to understand all of that long before we saw that photograph in the basement. But to tell you the truth, of all the reveals that shook my brain to its very core, none did so more than that which made this scene my favorite subversion in the series. Dina was the Titan that came to kill Carla and was the Titan that Eren punched. In making contact with her royal body, he was able to make use of the coordinate power. This wasn't a random secret power, but instead an example that Attack on Titan sticks to its rules of the world to such a degree that my initial reaction to watching this unfold before my very eyes was probably something like this. In other words, I liked it a lot and it blew my mind. So I guess what I'm trying to say with all of this is that what makes this basement and this section as iconic and so widely praised as it is, isn't just the photograph necessarily, but instead almost everything else that came before it that made that moment and that photograph make as much sense as it ultimately did. And for most of us, this recontextualized the story into something we had not seen before. No longer are we fighting titans, instead we are at war with humanity outside the walls.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's like, wait, what? If I kill all my enemies over there, will we finally be free? It's like, what?
Behind the Scenes, Season 3. While Season 3's narrative content, particularly in its second half, amounts to some fans' absolute favorite aspects of the series, this ultimately marks a decline in the show's production values in terms of its average quality. Despite containing arguably the best pieces of animation the series has ever seen, it unfortunately also had some remarkably unfortunate lows due to a deeply oppressive schedule and some major staff omissions. The troubles with the schedule here cannot be overstated. While we now look back at Season 3 as a two-parter, the show's third season was never intended to be divided in the first place. When the show first began, it was listed for 22 episodes, with the home release schedule likewise reflecting this initial broadcast time frame. It wasn't until the season reached its midpoint and the network began to air unfinished scenes again that listing dates began to change, and ultimately the final episode of what is now Part 1 concluded as per usual, followed by a hasty to be continued in Part 2 announcement. Perhaps the biggest example of these troubles occurred within the cave section of Part 1, featuring countless wonky drawings, unfinished cuts, and missing directions such as camera shake. It continues beyond this episode to an extent, but no other section features quite the same many hundreds of corrections found on the final home release. For things to melt at the first sign of action, it should come as no surprise that an emergency mid-season break was called for with the looming action-heavy second half on the horizon. However, with only 6 months between parts, with almost nothing but action ahead of them, the break could only do so much, and unfortunately the second half of the season struggled to keep together too, falling back on outsourcing in places once again. Eventually, fans noticed what's become known as meme tiles, a repeated cut of animation duplicated over and over and over again, It's the point of polarity masking the lack of finished content. Of course, it also didn't help that even the supervisors were struggling to correct off-model art in time for broadcast too. But all this schedule talk aside, one of the biggest losses in this season came from the absence of the makeup team that made such an impact in season 2. Due to the production of the Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress movie, the team's focus was entirely placed on said film with no time left over to work on Attack on Titan's 3rd season. For its dialogue-heavy first half, which most definitely would have benefited from the stunning polish the team would provide, this is undoubtedly the biggest blow felt this season. Something that, unlike unfinished drawings missing a deadline, isn't as simple as just slapping the finished work in the Blu-ray. Miraculously, however, season 3 is still widely regarded as a fan favorite season with some of the greatest pieces of animation and direction the show has ever seen.
I think it's just like they got it right in the right moments, if you know what I mean. Like where it's a bit like action heavy like this, it's really short, sweet, or like fast, like with Levi zooming through the town and that. I think that stands out more than like the other moments where you don't really kind of, unless you look really closely, see the mistakes.
It was an undeniable success and the results speak for themselves. So how was this even remotely feasible given the horrific conditions I just outlined? Well, the answer boils down to 3 major factors: Tetsuro Araki's wealth of industry contacts, the nurturing of emerging in-house talent, and of course, Adefumi Imai's unwavering dedication to best his prior work. In the case of Araki, he realized very quickly that for a dialogue-heavy portion of the show to hold people's attention, it must be directed and boarded to absolute perfection. If the narrative beats don't land, if the images aren't composed in interesting ways, then everything quickly comes crumbling down in the absence of animation. To remedy this, he called back to his early days at Studio Madhouse, bringing on board Yoshiaki Kawajiri of Ninja Scroll fame alongside Mamoru Hosoda's pupil Tomohiko Ito, most well known for Sword Art Online. Both of these individuals provided competent storyboards for their respective episodes. Along with them were WIT affiliates like Takayuki Hirao, who I mentioned earlier was an integral part of the team, and joined by Ryotaro Makihara, an animator turned director with a meticulous touch. Together they formed a powerful team and managed to alleviate the series' key moments in ways that more than satisfied fans, and hid the troubled production. The most obvious examples of guest direction elevating episodes comes in episode 46 in particular. The very famous tokusatsu director, friend of Hideaki Anno, and co-director of Shin Godzilla, Shinji Higuchi, storyboarded this episode. And with him came Toshiyuki Sato, the wonderful guest animator I mentioned in season 2, producing some horrifyingly natural Titan movement. In other words, in-house talents were really coming up to the forefront of the production and strutting their stuff with impressive finesse. Sachiko Matsumoto, who was largely unknown prior to this season, hit fans hard with her powerful animation of Erwin's demise, alongside the stunning effects-driven missile barrage as Mikasa attacks the Colossal Titan. Likewise, another relatively unknown talent by the name of Shunsuke Aoki delivered some wonderful Imai-inspired work with several Levi scenes.
Oh, mate. God. Imagine being that random person that animated the Levi scenes. Wow, what a...
And of course, finally, on the subject of Imai, it would be absolutely impossible to talk about this season without mentioning this man's name. To say that he blew people away would be an understatement of the highest order. His work on this section is both inspiring and, well, legendary. Storyboarding and animating his own scenes in this season, the sheer number of man-hours put into his contributions this time around paint a picture of an animator both dedicated to the franchise and constantly looking to improve his already magnificent skills. Kicking off the first part of the season in episode 2 with the absolutely spectacular chase scene, this 35-second piece of animation took Imai an entire month to animate.
What? That's 30 seconds. Wow, what a legend.
And that was with the help from 2 other people. It is such a stunning piece of work that wholeheartedly embodies the journey the production of this show has been on as it's come to perfect the 2D, 3D pipeline and continues to iterate on the sheer madness possible with it. However, there's one major piece of animation that sticks in people's minds when they think of this season. A 45-second scene of legendary proportions, and one that has firmly planted itself as an all-time iconic fight scene in anime history. It is, of course, Levi versus the Beast Titan.
Hell yeah.
This astonishing scene is the result of 4 months of hard work. Imai spent a month alone on simply storyboarding this sequence, and then another 3 months on top of that to actually animate it and bring it to life. 4 months for 45 seconds, and boy, was it worth it.
That's what I'm saying. So, like, they made it hit right in the moments that, like, really stand out. Oh my god, the amount of time.
The three-dimensionality on display here is absurd beyond description. Levi shoots around, down, under, and up, and what's so spectacular comparing this to previous 2D, 3D hybrid scenes is that unbelievably, background movement here is 2D animated. The consistency in form from frame to frame as the angle adjusts is just mind-blowing. Combined with the detail of the art, the complexity of the effects work, and sheer power of the animation's timing, it's really no surprise that this sits as one of the most iconic scenes around. It is emblematic of Attack on Titan's action and brought to life by the very man that has defined it since the very beginning. More than anything, I think Season 3 as a whole could not be more of a perfect send-off and summation of Wit Studios' time with Attack on Titan. In spite of horrific production conditions, it shows the power of a director's reach within the industry and the sheer dedication of its staff as they work tirelessly to overcome the odds.
That's such an amazing job. Just absolutely... Attack on Titan's so freaking good.
It's the gathering of a monumentous team accumulated over years of work and shows precisely what a tight-knit group of individuals can do under a leader with an unwavering vision. Alas, Wit Studios' story ends here for now as we head into the Mappa era for Season 4. With any sort of drastic change, heads turn, and people pay attention. We've seen as much with the use of the makeup team in Season 2.
God, all you need to say is like a different studio and people go, oh.
It can be both very effective and very jarring.
You don't have to say what the studio is, you know, it's just like,
But one thing's for sure, it will be noticed. The transition from Wit Studio to Mappa is a complicated one that offers up changes in each and every area, and regardless of how you feel about the change, there's no denying it's certainly gotten people talking and paying much closer attention to the production than ever before. To fully understand these changes, it's vital to get to grips with why this occurred in the first place. With any anime, a production committee exists to organize and fund the production and ultimately reap the majority of the reward should the show be successful. With the original seasons, the committee consists of Pony Canyon, who hold the rights to the music, Kodansha, who own the manga, Dentsu, who handle the advertising, MBS or NHK, the relevant TV network, and finally Production IG, who, as I established earlier, hold ownership over Wit via the IG port banner. When it came to Season 4, the committee, as per usual, came to Wit and asked them to tackle the season with the broadcast date set for late 2020. In response to this, Wit staff just looked at their calendars and it became very clear very quickly that there was absolutely no way that they could tackle this kind of a project with the current time restraints.
must have been mad as well to actually say no, considering, you know, how much success they've had with the first 3 seasons. That's crazy.
As much as they would have loved to have done it, it simply
just
wasn't
weren't able
feasible,
to.
and so the committee were forced to look into other studios. And this is why me outlining the production committee's makeup is important. There's nothing there that stops anyone from earning money by changing studios. No matter who ends up taking on the project, the committee still wins. They asked every studio under the sun, and absolutely everyone was sane enough to say no to the demanding schedule being offered to them, except for one. Studio Mappa. Once a prestigious and ethical studio led by Masao Muruyama of ex-Madhouse fame, his departure in 2016 led to a drastic change in the studio's once meticulous approach, instead transitioning to more of a conveyor belt company, pumping out show after show. If you scroll through the company's output, you can see Maruyama's vision from 2012 to 2016 in full effect, only producing 2 to 3 shows a year of largely very high quality.
Yeah, like as it's gone on, Mappa just started picking up everything, didn't they? Like Jujutsu Kaisen's a big one as well.
After that, however, you can see the number of shows balloon with sporadic differences in quality, with 2020 in particular seeing the company produce 8 shows.
So, damn it, never mind.
Their agreement
Oh no, let's go back.
committee still wins in Season 4. This
never
time,
mind.
however, Hayashi's role was as chief series director, meaning his work was split with the regular series director Jun Shishido, who served the same role in 2016's Yuri on Ice. The division of this role allowed the two to split the workload, and as a result, outside of a few episodes, the pair storyboarded the entire season themselves. For a production struggling to assemble core staff, this is a real blessing, and frankly, there's a lot to be said about the level of control and consistency achieved through productions with a strong singular vision. Now, that's not to say that Season 4 is one big homogenous blob. Remember ex-Ghibli member Masayuki Miyagi, who storyboarded the spectacular 10th episode of Season 2? Well, miraculously, he returned for Season 4's 15th episode, producing the harrowing presentation of Zeke's backstory. Although his work here doesn't have quite the same level of visual oomph as his last outing due to the weaker accompanying director and overall production, the episode is still a remarkable effort filled to the brim with ambitious angles and concepts.
Let's do it.
On the in-house side of things, the in-house talents provided some great work here too. Teruyuki Omine, a very idiosyncratic and ambitious director, worked on several pivotal episodes, oozing of atmosphere and impact. Satoshi Sakai from Wit Studio even appeared on one of his episodes and the one after. And in episode 2, Omine requested the use of rotoscoping, a technique he first explored when working on Dororo's second ending. As a result, the episode moved a lot and featured a great deal of character animation seldom found in the rest of the franchise.
Okay.
The execution is a little janky to say the least, but it's hard to fault in a production starved of specialist animators. Unfortunately, this lack of available domestic talent is where the show starts to drastically falter. You could write another 2-hour video about the anime industry's problems here, but to put it simply, there are too many shows being made and not enough staff to make them. This becomes an even bigger issue when you, as a studio, are already taking on too many shows for your own in-house talent to handle, let alone needing freelancers. The industry's solution, and one that Mappa took in Attack on Titan's case, is to take to social media and begin recruiting freelance animators from overseas. One such example would be Filipino animator Verkrieg, who produced one of the series' coolest scenes. There were also Chinese animators Han Han
Wow, I did not know that they did this. That's crazy.
and Inclore, who handled the Levi vs Beast Titan 2.0 fight, which is largely good, but many of their rough layouts were changed to 3D models due to the lack of time to finish the 2D drawings.
Right,
And
yeah.
that leads us to the big elephant in the room here, the CG Titans. For a lot of people, the transition from 2D Titan battles to 3D was a tough one to stomach.
God, people complained like crazy.
And it's been a hot topic ever since the season debuted. Understandably, change can be hard to come to grips with, and it's true that for many people, CG of any quality in anime will never hit quite the same impact as its 2D
animation,
counterparts.
yeah.
But in Attack on Titan's case, the CG is not only a dramatic improvement from what came before, it's also arguably the most consistent and strongest aspect within this production from Mappa. Taking over from Madbox, the CG of Season 4 is primarily handled by Studio V-Sign, a Mappa affiliate and old acquaintance of series director Hayashi. The team's work on Hayashi's previous show Dorehei Doro was justifiably praised for its seamless blending of 2D and 3D animation. And it continues here in Attack on Titan. Using 2D layouts for reference, the team makes full use of traditional animation techniques like frame modulation or frame cutting to produce movements more akin to 2D work. Likewise, the texture work is remarkably seamless, especially compared to Madbox's video game horror show. Gone are the bizarre gradients, instead replaced by flat cell shading, topped off with a line work filter applied to the 2D animation to really bring everything together with impressive finesse. It may not be as seamless as the work found in Studio Trigger's productions, but it's solid stuff and was most definitely not deserving of the hate directed its way upon
Yeah, not
broadcast.
at all, no.
Perhaps the most obvious and largest change, however, this season admonishes comes from the new character designs. While the previous character designer in Wit Studio, Kyoji Asano, had made many changes to his designs over the years, initially removing the thick black outlines and eventually slimming the faces and figures to age up the characters, the differences here are even greater. Tomohiro Kishi took straight to the manga, fortunately dealing with a very polished era of Isayama's art, and translated it rather directly to the screen. For example, he consciously undid what he considered to be overly sexy female designs, saying that glossy lips and overt sexiness don't really fit in the world of Attack on Titan. While this strong adherence to the manga
I think he forgot Asano already removed the gloss in season 3.
is great for hardcore fans of the source material, it's unfortunately a little less ideal for the animators that have to draw them. Not because of the nerfed women, but because they are immensely detailed, with hundreds of lines and particularly the new movement gear that infamously crushed the production with their appearance, causing scenes to take 3 times as long to animate. Steps were made to alleviate this, to an extent. For example, the intense hatching featured around characters' eyes and jaws in the majority of scenes aren't actually hand-drawn if you believe it. Instead, there are texture applied to a drawing later down the line, saving animators many hours drawing these details in on the many thousands of frames each episode. It's a very smart way of going about things, and a method I'm sure saved a lot of valuable time. Frustratingly, it's hard to talk about Season 4's production without sounding like you hate the show, like it's this irredeemable failure of a continuation that must be condemned in every way. I hope I didn't come across like that, because frankly, Season 4 is still a perfectly enjoyable entry to the franchise. It's very lucky in that the content it's covering has next to no action, and so the areas it's not lacking in, its directors and storyboard artists, can actually do a lot to elevate the struggling production in ways they absolutely wouldn't be able to were this as action-packed as Season 1. With all that said, it is a season of compromise. It's a season of unfulfilled potential, and most critically, it's a season of incredibly overworked animators struggling desperately to get things done on time. Anecdotes from staff of having episodes being incomplete less than 24 hours prior to the air date, corrections being applied so late that you can see the difference between the preview and the final episode, and heck, even corrections that straight up don't get applied in time whatsoever. The story of this season's creation is one wrought with misfortune and trade-offs, and one that yielded a less polished product as a result. However, that's not to say that this season didn't wow its audiences at times, thanks in part to some solid visuals on occasion, but more so the nail-biting, heart-stopping, and soul-destroying narrative that consumed my brain for weeks and weeks after reading. With the anime continuation not hitting our screens until early 2022, one would hope the production can stabilize in time. Until then, it's time to tackle this final quarter of the story in its purest form. It's time for war. You might have noticed in the last section concerning the basement that I neglected to discuss many of the other revelations and elements found therein, namely Grisha's backstory and the revelations of Marley. This wasn't an unconscious mistake I made in glancing over crucial material, instead it was a decision I made intentionally to discuss the themes and events found and explore them within this section, as tonally I think it's a much more appropriate fit, considering the somewhat controversial elephant in the room here. Now, while I'm sure a great number of you have no idea that this has happened, I'm also sure a significant portion of you may very well have skipped to this part of the video just to hear my impressions on this arc and the controversy surrounding it. Well, over the last couple of years, many publications and discussions online have labeled Attack on Titan as pro-imperialist, pro-fascist, anti-Semitic, and pro-war, particularly after its most recent arc and the revelations found therein. Given that my experience is with story and that I do not espouse to be politically savvy even in the slightest, I can only speak to what impression I've received from the narrative as a whole.
And just go forward as well. I do not forward any kind of political views whatsoever. Like, I literally am just there for the story. Do you know what I mean? And and people try and ask me like my opinions that I don't really have one in that aspect. Like, I just, if I enjoy the story, cool. But yeah.
I'll do so briefly, as I'm sure politics aren't necessarily why those of you that have watched this far have decided to do so. No. Concerning imperialism and the pro-war propaganda some see in the story, I don't think I can get behind this particular train of thought personally. Visually, the argument can be made that battles are depicted as awesome and something to admire, particularly with the driving force behind the narrative being that of nationalism early on. However, this is done intentionally to tear down those very concepts and themes surrounding nationalism later. Take the early opening sequences from the show as an example of this. These can be seen as nationalistic anthems depicting the flags and soldiers of paradise as heroic and in a positive light. However, over the course of the series, the tone of the OPs changes significantly but slowly. We learn through the series that death is an horrific consequence of this gallant heroism, and that these admirable soldiers are all just people putting their lives on the line, and what they stand to lose or risk by joining the military is on full display, with even the colors at this point having changed considerably to a much darker tone. The atmosphere has changed, and it's no longer upbeat. However, the changes continue as we finally arrive at Season 4's OP, which depicts soldiers as mindless zombies in a world devoid of life and color, with ruin around every corner. It actively depicts war as a negative thing that begets more suffering, and that's just looking at the OPs of this story, which just so happen to mirror the perspective of our main character, Eren Yeager, throughout. Naive to the truth of the world, at first, Eren looked to the military as the only ones worthy of respect to him. However, over the course of the narrative, much like the various OP's imagery have shown, Eren's rose-tinted impression of the military and war too fades as he discovers the horrors of it and the corruption found even in the military. By the time he reaches Marley in Season 4, he's become a completely different person with a very different yet resilient outlook on life. This is all to say that while I do believe that Attack on Titan focuses on war and combat, I think it does so not by promoting any pro-nationalistic message, but by telling a story about the horrors of war through the lens of one character, Eren. This would be different, however, if the nationalistic tendencies he adopts later in the story were projected in a positive light also. However, in this story, Eren, through radicalization, becomes the villain. His actions are condemned both explicitly and implicitly in the text, and the same can be said for both the Jaegerists that rise up with him and Marley at large. In fact, the entire point of Gabi's character is to show that disliking or hating people for traits that are otherwise out of their control is wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That's the message, or at least it's the one that I received. Now, the conversation, however, becomes much more muddy when we begin discussing the anti-Semitic criticisms of the story. To put it simply, if looked at in isolation, I do believe it's possible for someone to get the impression from the story that because the aliens have the capacity to turn into monsters, that the writer might in fact be communicating something equally nefarious about the Jewish people, considering the allegory Isayama is using to communicate that the aliens are akin to the Jewish people living under Nazi Germany. While I do think that this is an understandable reading of events in isolation, I don't think it's due to any insidious plan or prejudice against the Jewish community from the writer Isayama. Allegorically speaking, drawing comparisons like Isayama has done here, I think, were an attempt to connect us with and make us sympathetic to the plight of the alien people by depicting them as Jewish people during World War II. Whether that be through the armbands they wear, the ghettos they live in, or through the treatment they receive, these easily identifiable similarities are there to quickly help us better understand their otherwise complicated situation without requiring the text to bloat itself with detailed explanations. In storytelling, oftentimes allegories are implemented to connect us emotionally with something that exists in the real world already. George Orwell's Animal Farm is a textbook example of this. It didn't connect with people because they enjoyed a story about farm animals, they connected with it because it represented the danger surrounding the Russian Revolution. In Attack on Titan, Hajime Isayama outlines clear and easily identifiable similarities between the aliens and the Jewish people's treatment, and as an audience, it immediately encourages us to view Marley as the oppressive, fascist, and nationalistic force they are, and the aliens the victims of a horrid oppressor that needs to be stopped. In other words, the desired effect Isayama wanted from this comparison he's making was to endear us to the alien warriors sent to paradise and to build a hatred for how Marley has and continues to treat them. In effect, the story hinges on Isayama's ability to bridge the gap between the audience and the aliens of Marley that we have been fighting against ever since the story began. As an audience, we need to like them for the story to work, or at the very least, sympathize with them. This is what I believe Isayama's intentions were, for the aliens to be akin to the Jewish people insofar as their treatment, and not a one-to-one comparison. However, I cannot say that someone's interpretation of the material is wrong in this instance if they think he's wrongfully implying that the Jewish community are monsters. Taking all of this into account, however, I think it's much more reasonable and likely to assume that he was careless with this particular allegory and didn't intend for his story to be received that way, considering the main message of the story is anti-Semitism. Overall, I personally do not view Attack on Titan as an anti-Semitic, fascist, or pro-war work, but instead a cautionary tale on the dangers of indoctrination, propaganda, racism, and perhaps most interestingly, the path of suffering radicalization can lead one down. With Eren's transition into the antagonistic role, the threat of the Titans as a whole vanishes, as both sides, with their nuances explored, unite against a common threat. Isayama's handling of these subjects might be a little clumsy, but it's far, in my opinion, from problematic if you look at the series in its larger context. Now, with all of that addressed, let's finally dive into the story. The Marley arc. As I briefly touched upon a moment ago, the purpose for the beginning of this arc is
oh my god, the way this opened up was just so sick.
to endear us to an enemy we've been fighting against for the entire series. An enemy that's turned cities to rubble, torn families apart, and terrorized millions, causing untold suffering across not only the entire cast, but as we soon find out in the first episode of the season, other parts of the world too. Trying to successfully endear us to those responsible for the destruction within the walls seems impossible, but Isayama pulls it off. It should go without saying that this section shocks and challenges its audience perhaps more so than any other that's come before it. Throughout this video, I've given you my enthusiastic musics on the first season, I've screamed in joy over the second, and I nearly passed out from the sheer excitement during the prior season 3 material. However, with this, there is a very different approach taken and tone attempted to be struck. Instead of following the same ragtag group we've grown to love and appreciate since the beginning, Isayama decides to deviate from that by dragging us kicking and screaming as we explore the other side of this conflict across the sea in a land called Marley. Redefining the meaning of the phrase "a cruel world" through some harrowing war-torn imagery, within moments, Isayama had me on their side. The fourth season's material is deliciously complicated and nuanced. Not complicated in that it's difficult to follow, but emotionally complex primarily. We bounce from new characters, oppressors, victims, warriors, and even children, so much so that by the time the third episode of this season rolls around, it becomes clear that the real enemy isn't the military, hatred, or even the titans that we've been fighting existing this entire time, but instead, it's ignorance. A fact that those in power on both sides, Marley and Paradise, to varying degrees, have utilized to oppress and control their respective populations. I mean, this is precisely why Erwin existed within the story and why the entire cast was so gung-ho on reaching Shiganshina and the basement in the first place. It was to discover the truth, to become less ignorant. Conversely, on the other side of the conflict in Marley, we see this theme explored to its natural extreme. The indoctrination of the youth, brainwashing them into not only believing that they themselves are devil spawn, but that it is their duty to die for Marley and to repent for these inherent sins they supposedly have. And so, when I discovered we weren't going to be following the point of view of the scouts, but instead the up-and-coming recruits and forces from Marley instead, I, without any word of hyperbole, jumped for friggin' joy. At this point, I hadn't...
It was a very interesting approach to it, wasn't it? Because you're like, wait a minute, where is everybody? And then it's like, oh, okay.
Decided to read ahead in the manga and still had no clue how the story was intending on proceeding. However, electing to show us that the enemy we've been fighting against all this time aren't monsters, but people trying to stay alive too, was exactly the sort of injection of narrative ambiguity and moral nuance I was expecting from this tale. And boy, was I happy.
Gabby gang, Gabby gang, Gabby gang, Gabby gang, Gabby gang, Gabby gang, Gabby gang. We into the battlefield too smart.
God, everyone absolutely hated it when she... Oh my god. Yeah, let's get into it.
Got a big brain but a bigger heart.
This is exactly why I found Gabby to be such a tremendously well-written and important character to help introduce us to the indoctrination and propaganda rampant in the world of Marley. She's single-minded, well-trained, and filled with hate, reminding us that, unlike the audience, the characters in this story are ignorant and easily manipulated, all in the name of seizing power for Marley.
まだ終わりたくない。まだ何も分かってないんだ。
This is where the relentless pursuit of power leads us to. A world that can turn the most compassionate of children into monsters and a defenseless child into a heartless attacker. Eren and Reiner, despite being at each other's throats for the majority of the story, are actually remarkably more the same than they are different. A cursory glance back over the story, particularly after the material covered in this season, demonstrates that both Reiner and Eren have a threshold for suffering that far exceeds most, if not everyone, in this tale. They each go through torment and tremendous loss for their respective goals, somehow finding the resolve to do so along the way. Unlike other characters that often crumble in the series, Eren chooses freedom over comfort, and Reiner too chose. In the face of absolute failure and horror, he kept pushing forward. Now, I spent a considerable amount of time towards the beginning of this video discussing and exploring how and why Eren's character works within this story, explaining that he's an active protagonist trapped in a world that forced him to be reactionary. And I bring this up again because Reiner, on the other hand, is a reactionary character living in a world that forces him to be active. Eren, a
That's very true. Yeah, he's constantly being pushed.
Sword forced to defend, and Reiner, a shield forced to attack. Both of these characters, while inverses of each other, share a desire that no matter what, we deserve better. Reiner is fighting in the hope that one day he will be the hero that will raise the Eldian people standing in the world, and Eren is fighting for the freedom of humanity. They are both the protagonists on each of their respective sides of this wall. And ironically, it's that very element to their personalities that they have in common that leads them to be mortal enemies, great friends, and ultimately, the reason this entire story is being told at all. And if you're thinking the similarities between these two characters ends here, you'd be dead wrong. In the beginning, both Reiner and Eren believed that they were inherently special, that something inside them made them worthy of all this bloodshed, failure, and suffering that they've caused on their way towards this ultimate goal. However, as I pointed out in the prior section, Eren has an existential crisis after he sees that the only reason he was able to transform in the first place was due to his father forcing it upon him after killing the Reese family brutally. And as we discover in this section, Reiner was the worst warrior trainee, only receiving his special qualities because Marcel influenced and manipulated the higher-ups into choosing him. There's a phenomenal and superbly written video dissecting this very relationship I'm discussing between Reiner and Eren called Two Sides of the Same Coin by the YouTube channel Soul. And in it he points to a specific panel from the manga that perfectly captures Reiner's character succinctly. And it does so because in this image, Reiner's reality and delusion stand in stark contrast, side by side. I will save everyone, he says as he abandons Marcel. I'm going to punish the island devils, despite acting like more of a devil than any of the Eldians he's demonized. I'm going to become a hero, he says, killing thousands of innocents and failing his mission. Through this flashback, we can clearly see that not only is Reiner running away from this Titan, but he's running away from his problems. From a mother who's manipulative and delusional, and a father who despises him. And interestingly, it's this coping mechanism, this distancing himself from dealing with who he really is, that creates instances where Reiner, at times, seemed to be innocent and good earlier in the series. Much like Eren's shonen hero personality being at odds with the rest of the world, Reiner has his own shonen hero persona that too is at odds with reality. And so, when Marcel gets eaten after saving Reiner, the leader and best candidate among them, Reiner is forced to hide in his delusion and press forward with his mission to be the hero that he thinks he's meant to be. And in doing so, realizes that the people he's been taught to hate his entire life are just regular people like him back home. And ironically enough, it's through his embodiment of this delusion that he becomes the person he always wanted to be in paradise. Someone strong, reliable, and someone people can look up to, until he snaps. Now, years later, all he can do is suffer the consequences of his actions in total depression. He made fatal mistakes that others have had to pay the price for, and he never became the hero he thought he was destined to be.
俺は頑張るしかねえ。頑張ってお前らができるだけ苦しんで死ぬように努力するよ。
If you ever needed evidence of dramatic character development in Attack on Titan, look no further than right here in this scene from Season 4.
Mate, as soon as you see them together, you're like, oh, that's gonna go off. This moment, everyone talks about this moment so much that there is a Funko anime moment where it's just these two together in this room.
Having once demonized him as a traitor he vowed to kill, Eren now sees the humanity in Reiner. While Reiner, someone who constantly ran away to protect his sanity, is now forced to face the living embodiment of his past sins. And Eren, now moments before he commits mass genocide, probes Reiner to see if he will be able to live with it like he has. Will he be able to accept it? In this moment, Eren acknowledges that they are very much the same.
Insane. Insane. And the Warhammer Titan's not even in it for that long, and the way he uses the jaws. Oh.
This is the biggest shift in the entire series from a character standpoint. After following Eren's struggle as an active protagonist forced to bend to the will of the cruel world, Eren finally has the agency he so desperately yearned for, and in achieving such, killed countless innocents, becoming the villain of this series itself. Then, on the other side of the coin, after admitting to the sins of his past for the first time aloud and bending his knees to Eren before him, Reiner begrudgingly becomes the hero of this story. The sword that was once defending is now attacking, and the shield that was once forcing itself to attack is now defending those that need protection. The Attack Titan and the Armor Titan are now in their natural states. So let's dance! Naturally, it's around this time I simply couldn't wait for the anime any longer and picked up the manga to read ahead in the series, because this fight may very well be my favorite from a thematic standpoint, for what it represents in the series. It's such a strong and clear mirroring of the events in Shiganshina, with Gabi as an appropriately headstrong stand-in for Eren as he becomes the monster he once despised.
That was incredible. He just used the jaw titan to then smash that open. Oh my god.
I mean, there's a reason why they composed the poster of Season 4 to look like this, because it mirrors the very first one. And the fight that takes place is one of the most dominant and adrenaline-pumping outings from Isayama. While being much more narratively focused on the subtext of the heinous actions from Eren, it also sports some truly hellish visuals and graphic scenes. And can we take a moment to talk about how awesome Peck is during this? Figuring out what was happening, enabling her to make the save with Porco in the middle of an enemy sneak attack. There's some tremendous action here, the back and forths are stupendous, but no moment from this fight, for me, outshines the appearance of the scouts.
Hell yeah.
Seeing them suddenly and slowly begin to make themselves known is both an exhilarating and terrifying experience in this season, climaxing with a beautifully delivered quote by Porco, as haunting as it is pathetic, while the soldiers from Paradise begin surrounding him. Can't you see I'm a Titan? These guys are just humans, yet they're coming to kill me? These guys, they're the devils of Paradise. It's such an horrific scene that builds beautifully and makes out the forces of paradise to be every bit as terrifying and monstrous as they've been warned they were. And yet, as an audience, we know that not to be true. There are so many mixed emotions, implications, and consequences from this battle, and in real time, I found myself reeling just trying to grasp the scope of this event. All the while, Gabby is forced to watch her friends get trampled to death or killed quickly and suddenly by the devils from paradise, just like Eren was forced to do all those years ago.
man.
However, unlike Eren, Gabby is different. She can do something about it.
Rage.
War for Paradise arc. It was clear, for me at least, while I was watching all of this suffering unfold, that we were finally entering the endgame of this story. For Sasha, who had up until this point been such a positive force to not only have to participate, but to die suddenly and unceremoniously because of this fighting, it made me feel, well, conflicted, to put it bluntly. In one way, I felt it appropriate. The cynical direction Eren chose to take the story in meant that positivity had to take a backseat, and so, thematically, it felt as though the joy of the series had died also. The one person that was always looking to the future with optimism now no longer has a place in this cruel world. And unlike what felt like at the time the entire internet, I didn't hold Gabby entirely responsible. I loved Sasha as a character, but those actions Gabby took were a retaliation against an aggressor
Yeah.
she'd been raised and trained to hate her entire life. And ironically, due to the way we follow their journey from this point on, both Gabby as well as Falco represent the future of this world. Twisted as their views once were, it's their journey in the pursuit of truth that makes, for me, the most narratively compelling portion of this upcoming final part to the anime. I don't think it's coincidence that this section of the story contends and deals with the radicalization and de-radicalization of two very similar characters, but at very different times in their lives, Eren and Gabby. Obviously the stand-in for Eren during the raid of Liberio, Gabby is placed in a position of contempt amongst the viewership. All the while, we're more inclined to hope for and forgive the demonstrably larger scale of suffering Eren has
Eren
unloaded
has just
on
done
these
to
people
everyone.
due
Yeah,
to
yeah,
our
crazy.
long-standing relationship with the character. However, as Eren, unrestrained, pushes himself further and further astray, Gabby, well, she starts to change. And for complete transparency, I wasn't exactly surprised by the direction her character was taken in. It made perfect sense to me for her to serve this purpose, to push Gabby's ideals and prejudices to the absolute limit until her worldview is shattered, leaving her forced to finally contend with reality. Finally starting to see clarity past the ignorance that once clouded her mind. All of this is perfectly good, but it's how Isayama got us to that point that I thought was the most brilliant and surprising aspect of it, proving it's not the destination, but the journey that changes minds. And no solitary episode better exemplifies that progression or journey than this one, episode 70, entitled Deceiver. It's just, it gives me the good chemicals. I could go on and on about the gorgeous storyboard this episode boasts, or how it massively endeared me towards the character of Falco, but in truth, the main reason why I loved this episode came down to how it used the Gabby character to fully explore what radicalization can mean, and how the greater story played into this message being amplified substantially. Now, I touched on this briefly in the Season 2 section of this review, but the episode where Sasha rescues a little girl from a titan stood as one of the highlights of that arc.
Oh yeah, and the reveal that girl is the one that she's like hanging out with, and she
For me, taking a character that once held onto a prejudice
Ah.
concerning outsiders and turned her into a strong hero that saved an innocent. And that very innocent helped to save Gabby and Falco, all the while confronting them about their hatred for her people. And we know Gabby is the one that kills Sasha, the girl that saved her. And she doesn't even know about that. God, I'm getting worked up just talking about this one. I love this episode. The messaging of the story here is fantastic, obviously. The script is great, but it's what's not being said that almost makes the most noise on this occasion for me. The expressions falling across Gabby's face as her world comes slowly crashing down around her, the sobering realization that everything she's been taught might actually be a lie. It's one of the most cathartic conversations in the series, but you know what's not cathartic? Remember when I said that this story was deliciously complicated and nuanced? Well, this is what I meant. One, it's obvious to everyone that Flock is a hellspawn that deserves a fiery death more
absolute piece of work.
painful than I can possibly describe. It's also shown to us how and why he came to feel this way. This now radical leader of the Jaegerist forces doesn't just sprout out from thin air. Like almost everything else in this story, it does so after the appropriate time and build-up. All the way back in the prior season, we can all plainly see the seeds for this sort of corruption being present. It's all there. His fear, his hatred, his punchable face, it's there, plain as day. He believes in a nationalistic vision for the future, and those thoughts were nurtured accidentally through the earnest efforts of one Hanji and the forces of Paradise as they, over the course of 4 years, strove for a peaceful resolution and integration into the broader world. And while Eren is a big part of this entire movement, and I do fully intend on talking about our man that's one with the man bun, I thought the dynamic Hanji Zo provided acted as the best narrative opposing force to Flock's cruel, overly nationalistic view in the story, with her insisting that finding a peaceful resolution is the only worthwhile pursuit for a better tomorrow. But situations are complicated, and watching as Hanji is forced to withhold information from the people she promised she wouldn't lie to ever again hurts. But again, we can understand why she's making those decisions, making all of these characters not only feel flawed, but much more real. After the amazing fight and aftermath on the Raid of Liberio finishes, the story sort of takes a pit stop in Expositionville and spends a night or two in the flashback hotel. It's not my favorite part of the story, but I can see why it's needed, and I'd rather it be there than it not. And this is vital for 2 reasons. It helps us better hate Flock with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns, and it helps us set up and build tension as we press forward into the climax of the story. As an audience, we know that there are so many enemies en route to Paradise wanting to clap back after what happened. And so what initially started as a frustrating annoyance within the military and public questioning why Eren was apprehended in the first place, it eventually and naturally turns into a full-blown movement to overthrow the scouts and free Eren. This very much is the final setup phase of the story, and Isayama doesn't want to screw anything up. And so, while it might be a little pedantic with some of the characters and episodes as we discuss foreign policy with not Japan or build a railroad, it's also filled with meaningful character moments alongside some intensely interesting and heartbreaking events, until it too reaches a boiling point.
俺はガキの頃からずっと
Always hated you.
ミカサ、お前が大嫌いだった。
Jeez, dude!
Watch
Yeah.
this, Lise. You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. And now.
This was one of the hardest scenes to sit through, particularly in the manga. The way Isayama drew Mikasa's face during this exchange is honestly heartbreaking, with Armin surprisingly and sufficiently carrying a lot of the emotional weight here too. If you cast your minds back to episode 1 of the series, Armin chooses not to fight the bullies, for he believes, much like he does now, if he were to fight back, it would be stooping to their level. This speaks to his philosophy in pursuing a peaceful means of integrating within the world. He sees retaliation and violence as stooping to their level. And while Eren was talking down to him specifically for a considerable portion of this, he held himself still the same way he would when facing any other bully. However, he cracks when Eren rips Mikasa's heart to pieces. It's a gut-wrenching scene, and I haven't even begun to talk about Levi. Zeke's betrayal of Marley and Levi's supervision of him stands as the only moment in recent memory where Attack on Titan actually made my heart sink into my stomach as a strong wave of insight and sudden realization cascaded over my body. The utilization of the wine to infect all of the unsuspecting Eldians with Zeke's spinal fluid was something I never saw coming and found deviously clever.
Mate, yeah, I was just like, what is going on?
It's already been established that the Titan formula needs to get into the bloodstream, and alcoholic beverages work by transporting the alcohol into the bloodstream. All the foreshadowing pieces were there, including a really strange altercation at a restaurant with Sasha's boy toy. It's such a terrific adherence to the mechanics of the world while still managing to pull a surprise out of what felt like thin air, creating one of the most tense moments I had ever experienced while reading through a story. And perhaps because this was a scene I experienced in the manga first, I actually didn't enjoy it nearly as much in the anime. When I saw this panel, I felt as though that was it for Levi. It felt to me that a death here could be tragic and serve to create more tension leading into the climax later. And so, in other words, as I was reading through this, I literally convinced myself that he was done for. But
You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, it's his team, though. It's like, I can't let them live like this.
The mad lad styles on the Beast Titan and drags his stubby ass into a cart. I firmly believe my preference for this is squarely a result of me reading the manga first, and in the anime, it's a great adaptation for the most part. And then we get Zeke's flashback. At this point in the story, we're made fully aware of Zeke's motivations to work alongside Eren, but what I like the most about Zeke's portrayal is that, much like everything that's revealed in this series, it's foreshadowed. Numerous times during the lead up to this flashback, plenty of personnel have remarked at how special Zeke is, but never outing his royal blood as the reason. And simply put, it's because he never told them. Now, it's very possible that that reveal wouldn't have landed for me had I been reading week to week, but I binged this series hard and caught up in like 2 days at chapter like 137. So look, I was completely surprised when I saw Zeke as a traitor to Marley, but when I saw what the plan was, things got extremely serious and real very quick. With him having the means to enact his plans seemingly at the ready, all he needs to do is... Which brings us to here, the end of the anime, with the two protagonists from either side, Reiner and Eren, facing each other once again for what will no doubt be a battle to decide the future of this world. It's the perfect point to leave off this story, but a ridiculous cliffhanger considering what I know comes next. But as you know, this is where the anime chose to go on a mid-season break. I will henceforth be covering material as of yet not adapted by the anime, so if
at
you
the time anyway, like obviously at the time of me doing this, anime's over, loved it, but yeah.
wish to avoid spoilers and have watched this far, I would like to say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll come back to visit once the series returns. Alright, those that care about spoilers are gone now. Thank God. I wasn't sure how much longer I could go without mentioning a spoiler like the rumbling, or the weird centipede thing, or Eren's head being blown off, but now I'm amongst those that don't mind, so let's press on forward.
Please.
To tell you the truth, the rumbling is the single most terrifying action set piece I've seen committed to the pages of any manga. And going into this final section on Paradise, I found myself reflecting on the beginning of this arc quite a lot. The motivations surrounding Eren are honestly unsettling to say the least, not just because of what manifests from them, but because the story has been told from Eren's point of view for pretty much its entire run. If you think back across the Attack on Titan story, it's all pretty much following Eren's journey and story surrounding his origin. However, that's not the case in Season 4. One of the first things we notice about the arc is that we're following a different perspective, and the first time we see Eren is as an intruder or outsider to the narrative. The manga and the anime frame this scene to show Eren as the villain or antagonist. He interrupts the narrative and rains destruction down upon those around him, many of whom are innocent. However, what makes it scary, to me at least, is that over the course of the arc, we're shown his thought process. The conflicts in Liberio, the uprising of the Aegarists, the Battle of Paradise afterwards, and of course the rumbling, are all metaphors for how conflict manifests in the real world, and the horrible outcomes that can stem from them. What began as a story about a boy and his friends fighting against what was understood to be an absolute evil outside the walls was eventually revealed to be a desperate and conflicted assault from some brainwashed and abused children acting on behalf of a tyrannical government across the sea. The story became so much more complicated and nuanced. Eren spent years of his life looking for an alternative to war with Marley, and all his efforts in attempting to do so went out the window the instant Marley themselves declared war on Paradise, fully intending on slaughtering all of them in order to take what they want for themselves. And much like those living in Shiganshina that faithful day in the beginning, the civilians of Marley and people like Gabi will only see Eren as a pure evil maniac acting on his inherent devil nature. Eren's attack on Liberio, while I believe it was coming anyway, happened there and then because that's where Marley declared war on Paradise. His attacks were targeted against Marleyan officials and sponsors after the declaration was made. The current plan being worked on by the likes of Hanji, Armin, and the rest of the scouts through foreign politics were hinging on a reality that was founded in fantasy, much as it pains me to say. But pretending like they could have waited 50 years to become part of some international trade and political sphere becomes nigh impossible when we consider the broader context that Marley was formulating a plan of action against them long before they could have reached that goal. Not to mention rally support from the rest of the world and spread propaganda concerning the Eldians of Paradise. This of course isn't to say that I support Eren's efforts here, absolutely not. But there's a big difference between supporting Eren's rumbling and understanding that after this aforementioned point, it's either a question of succeeding in a monstrous war effort for your entire country, or letting them die for the benefit of a foreign elite. And that's the terrifying reality of this story. The notion that sometimes in very, very serious life-threatening situations, there are no clear or straightforward answers available. Both choices are hard. Eren understands that the only way for him to make paradise free is to win a war against the entire rest of the world. And the rumbling is the only weapon they have with which to achieve that.
Crazy.
On the other side of the coin, the hero forces whom we follow the point of view of are comprised of oppressors and oppressed alike. From all sides of this conflict, coming together deciding to sacrifice their own people to ensure the survival of a far greater number. Understanding that if they succeed, the oppressors will massacre and oppress ruthlessly and without reluctance, most likely. And I think that's what makes this final section of Attack on Titan so intense and heart-stoppingly captivating. It's why I've spent what is now over 60 pages of a script writing about it, and I'm sure it's why a number of you have been watching all of this time too. It's a clashing of ideals in a situation where each ideal is forced logically to its most extreme conclusions. There is no pure evildoer or wholly correct hero, and there is no way out of this situation that doesn't end in significant and tragic loss on both sides. There's only trade-offs available here, and having to face that as a reader felt horrific. Horrific because that's the way the world is, and it forces you to contend with that reality. Chapter 126 and 127 are supremely powerful, I think, because it forces our new hero team, if you can call them that, to sit during the night and contend with what lies before them and what the give and take of the upcoming situations are. A strong highlight for me has to be how Hanji, much like her commander before her, gave up her life to give our heroes a chance at effectively saving the world from Eren's wrath.
And the anime version of that was so epic. I could not believe what I was watching, man. Mad respect to her. She just went so hard and went out. Oh, trooper, man.
Made all the more effective by its aftermath as she finds herself in the paths alongside all those she's lost. It's a powerful moment made all the more so by how often throughout this series Hanji has second-guessed herself and how much of the blame she shoulders herself for this event happening. She's been a massively optimistic character and the perfect choice to succeed Erwin, I think. She's had to contend with learning that Titans were once people that she experimented on and tortured. She's had to deal with tremendous loss, and she's had to deal with letting people down time and time again. Like everything else in this series, it's a bummer, but she's optimistic for a better tomorrow until the bitter end. With a supremely powerful panel seeing her exclaim, "I'm not accepting genocide." She values life. She recognizes that there are innocent and defenseless people all over the world. So, in other words, she wants to protect humanity. Not just her humanity in paradise, but all of it.
Everywhere,
and all of this calm before the big storm that eventually erupts as they conflict at the very end. This piece before it gave me pause to consider and cast my mind back to appreciate all the hidden hints foreshadowing this very event. Whether it be exactly talking to Eren during his trial in Season 1 about either being a demon of destruction or a savior. There are two instances with Armin, one where he chats with Jean about the Titans they discovered in the walls potentially going for a walk, or Armin again remarking that Eren always runs off on his own, leaving them behind during the Season 2 material. Heck, even the way Eren justifies his killing of the human traffickers to protect Mikasa might help explain how he dehumanizes those that might threaten paradise in the wider world. He thinks of them as animals threatening the freedoms of himself and his loved ones. And so, keeping all of these in mind, as I look on watching as Eren marches like some sort of eldritch nightmare across the sea and arrives on the mainland, as a reader, I'm just faced with the suffering and terror that this sort of force brings to the world. Now, before I move on to the final battle, I have to shout out this amazing artist and creator on YouTube called Kane Pixels. They've gone out of their way to recreate some of the major story beats from Attack on Titan's final section in a found footage news report style from the 1940s or 30s. It's amazing and terrifying. Check it out. Okay, time for the big battle. Oh, wait, no. Okay, wait, no. First thing. Oh, jeez. Levi. How could I forget Levi? Okay, so Levi's alive. The scene where his body is discovered by Hanji, the way it's framed or worded, and the way the scene cuts short, in my heart of hearts, I knew there was a good chance Levi was alive. Chapters and chapters and chapters passed on by, and no Levi. Until suddenly, Levi's alive! I was so pumped. Now, naturally,
happy
I
to see
didn't
it
have the
was
same build-up like some of you guys might have had. I mean, I blitzed through pretty much all of the prelude to the rumbling and the battle thereafter in a couple days, but even then, I made a lot of really weird and loud happy noises as soon as my brain processed what happened. Levi, you absolute monster and human wrecking machine, you are alive. Okay, now it's time for what I thought was the most hyped thing I've ever seen. The final battle. But first, a small disclaimer. Something I noticed that happened to me anyway, when I was part of a community surrounding a long-running franchise, was that eventually I became less flexible to what the author or products were delivering. In other words, I didn't like it as much. Now, plenty of people haven't liked the last few chapters of Attack on Titan, and I'm sure it's for very justifiable reasons, but I can say that I had that same experience. Personally, I love them. So if you're one of those people who didn't like it, I'm sorry that you didn't, but I can't speak to your experience, I can only speak to my own. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. Truth be told, usually when I write about a given section, I like to write out the bullet points of what I think makes it tick so I can better structure my arguments or observations concerning it thereafter. But with this, there's just too much. It's fittingly the culmination of most of the present characters' arcs, as well as the send-off to the series. Jean acts as the selfless hero, Armin the assertive strategist, Gabby is de-radicalized, and
I mean, I thought it was boss the way she actually managed to get a shot in, because you're thinking she's got a gun, they're Titans, what she can do, but then she gets the eye shots.
aiding
Cool.
the effort. Levi, in devastating fashion, completes the last ever mission Erwin ever
Hell
gave him.
yes.
Peck styles like only the Card Titan can, and Mikasa overcame her greatest weakness. And that's not even to make mention of the scale this battle boasts from a visual standpoint. I need only point to one of the many big page spreads to demonstrate the astounding progression Isayama has made as an artist over the last 11 years of publication.
class.
I mean, who knew consistent practice could make you amazing? This entire fight is packed with so much content that honestly, I think I could write another 2-hour video alongside detailing the conflicts and consequences that emerge from this Mega Man-esque showdown against the villains of the past. So, for the sake of compromise, let's talk about my favorite aspects of it and why I thought they worked as well as they did for me. And maybe a thing or two that I didn't like. Okay, first things first. The paths. How they work and how they're depicted before, leading up to, and during this battle serve to amplify the story greatly for me, impressing me further by how everything here makes sense because everything has been slowly built up to over the course of 100+ chapters. If you told me in 2013 that little kid Eren would be the living embodiment of all my greatest fears, both physical and existential, all made possible through the power of Titan Path blood magic, I would have said, you're crazy and I'm not watching this story. The paths and how they connect different parts of this story are visually stunning and serve to bring everyone together for tons of meaningful scenes, whether it be the ambush that Zeke tries to get Eren with, only for him to reverse Uno card the bearded
that was
blondie and
class.
say, actually no, I'm ambushing you. One of the best moments with the paths has to be how Eren announces to all the Eldian people, both in Paradise and throughout the rest of the world, that the rumbling is happening. That honestly gave me shivers and made the occasion feel all the more massive and hopeless. This is peak Titan magic, and it's so out there and crazy, yet feels so perfectly connected and justified and not at all silly when in the context of Attack on Titan's world. And during this battle, the paths play an integral role in the functionality of this. I mean, look at this! Armin gives Zeke...
Mate, they did this well in the anime as well. So like, yeah, he's holding the baseball. I'm interested to see how they do this, but then Zeke sees the baseball, but Armin's seeing a leaf, isn't he? And a
feels bad man speech, only it's actually really nice and not at all silly like I'm describing it, and he pops out like a pimple on prom night from Eren's founding Titan body. Like, I love how this all makes sense, but out of context, it could be the weirdest thing anyone could have seen that week. And Levi has no chill at all, by the way. Dude barely gets a few words out, and Levi eviscerates him from existence. Jokes aside though, I thought this moment was great, and the reason why is painted across Levi's face after he does the deed. Erwin wanted him to take out the Beast Titan, a threat to humanity, but in making himself visible, Zeke found the beauty in being alive. And so while Levi did take out his target, at the same time, he didn't. The Zeke that he was assigned to take out was long gone. I mean, geez. Not even Levi gets to be happy the way that he wanted to. And the battle that takes place might be one of the best I've seen in fiction. As I mentioned prior, there are so many individual moving parts to consider, each with their own motivating factors and distinct goals. Now, with something like this, I was terrified that it could get extremely messy and convoluted very quick. But right from the outset, we are given a goal, and that soon becomes a 2-part plan, and then a 3-part plan, and then the plan suddenly becomes a monument to how screwed they all really are. This was one of the coolest aspects of this tale. There's honestly tons to love about this part of the story, but that's not to say that I'm in love with everything it has to offer. If there's one aspect to this finale that I'm lukewarm on, it's the Titan centipede thing. But that's not to say that I don't think it makes sense, at least not any less than a tree of life does in Norse mythology. It's like the existence of God in the Bible. It's this source of life that in the series' case kicks off the story in Ymir's flashback, giving her the power of the Titans and spawning everything that happens after that. Zeke even goes as far as to liken it to the God particle more or less, in that it's this mysterious entity that happened to survive among the matter that vanished. However, I do think there's criticism to be made here nevertheless. This is a story where pretty much every character and element found therein has been massively fleshed out. And the byproduct of that is a story where you could effectively drag every Eldian in the world to a Google Hangout in the paths, and it doesn't come across as silly or ill-fitted. With how character-driven everything is, a more nebulous concept like this centipede that's external to the story and not really acknowledged by anyone directly can feel a bit, I don't know, underwhelming. It's a very important figure that isn't expounded upon in masses of detail, so its importance is quite easily overlooked, and as a result kind of makes its appearance in the finale a little lackluster if you're not 100% glued to every sentence the manga throws at you. However, with that said, Eren Colossal Titan fight with Armin! As Eren's rumbling is put on hold and he has to dedicate all of his energy to contend with Armin's Colossal Titan, all eyes fall to Mikasa as she needs to make the final move here to decide what way she's going to go about this. Something I will say about this though is that for reasons, some of which I've outlined in this video, Mikasa comes across as so much more interesting and likable in the manga. Tragically, much of what has been cut to allow for adequate anime pacing has been an element to her character that brought her to life for me and made this moment feel all the more impactful. And for that reason, among many others, I am happy that I started reading the manga when I did in preparation for this video. It made this chapter significantly so much more powerful and immeasurably heartbreaking. And as I watched Mikasa now for the final time soar through the air and into the mouth of Eren's colossal founder, my heart stopped as I watched Mikasa sever the head of the person she loves more than anyone else in the world, followed by a kiss I will sincerely never forget. Both horrific and beautiful in its depiction, an action that perfectly captures Attack on Titan's soul, allowing Isayama to make his biggest and farthest reaching callback he's ever made in the series. See you later, Eren, echoing the opening words from chapter 1 over 11 years ago. I get chills just thinking about it. However, perhaps more likely to be overlooked has been one of the most ironic potential foreshadowings I noticed while rewatching the series in my research for this video. In episode 5's conclusion, Eren says, much like he does in the manga, "You think I'm going to die in a place like this?" as he stands in the mouth of a Titan, with his desire to protect his friend and to fight for what he believes in being the very reason he found himself in that specific position in the first place. And now, over 130 chapters later, we find ourselves at the end of this long, twisting story, again with Eren, through his intense and unyielding desire to protect what he cares for, places himself in a place like this. All of his own creation forcing his loved one's hands to do the unthinkable. God! I love this story!
Yeah, well.
Alright guys, small disclaimer. Before I move on to my final thoughts surrounding this series, I'm actually recording this the day the video comes out because it turns out chapter 139 came with a lot more baggage than I was anticipating. While I think, in broad strokes, the next paragraphs to this video surmise my overall thoughts and impressions on the series and its ending to some extent, I've decided that it's necessary for me to give my full and more complicated and critical impressions of it once official translations become available for chapter 139. So, for now, enjoy my final thoughts on a series which I wrote prior to the full chapter dropping, and anticipate a more detailed video on the final chapter and my feelings surrounding it next week. Thanks. And that's when we get it. The last chapter, 139. I knew that going into this it would be mostly cleanup on the details and aftermath of the prior chapter's aftershocks. But something did surprise me here. Having been a story that's encouraged me to think instead of feel all of this time, For the last chapter, all I could focus on while reading was my now long history with this series. After 8 years of personally keeping up with it, sharing it with family, and discussing it long into the wee hours of the night with my closest friends, I'm confronted with the reality that Attack on Titan is over. Like any great story worth telling, I am somewhat sad to see it go, but overcome with joy that the author got to tell the story he wanted to share with us in its entirety. A story detailing the dangers of racism, ignorance, and radicalization, all while demonstrating that sometimes, much like real life, there are no clear-cut right answers for any side, only trade-offs. The muddied or messy messaging many began to criticize this series for brandishing, while it might not be for everyone for sometimes understandable reasons, for me I think it helped to capture the muddy and messy nature of global politics and humanity at large without compromising towards a Deus Ex Machina type contrivance that points to an obvious world peace solution when in reality something like that just doesn't exist. It's sad, it's controversial, and it's sometimes incredibly disheartening. And while it concludes in this fashion, I think it does so while leaving behind a gentle yet hopeful echo. One that reminds us that yes, terror may create cruel people, pacifism may lead to suffering, and love can lead to heartbreak. But we shouldn't lose hope for the possibilities the future might bring. For despite everything I've mentioned, there's a reason why we love, why we believe, and why we continue to fight until the bitter end.
Great, that was cool. I like that. That was really good review. So, like I said, I'll check out the final chapter review as a separate video. But that was cool to see. I'm glad that he did actually do anime and manga comparisons. Not a lot, but it's interesting that Mikasa seemed to have more of an interesting character within the manga than she did the anime. Shame, and certain conversations to do with the story were left out in that, and Levi's moment with her. But all in all, yeah. So cool. Yeah, like I said, check out the finale. Oh, my back's killing. In a separate video, and thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video I upload, link in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is the last portion. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you for that. And thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. See you guys next time.